What if I told you that the life you are living right now is nothing more than the reflection of the thoughts you carried yesterday? Your mind is not just a place where random ideas come and go. It is a silent architect, constantly designing the structure of your reality. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." This timeless teaching reminds us that our minds are like mirrors, reflecting back into the world everything we hold within. If your inner world is filled with fear, doubt, and negativity, your outer world will eventually mirror those same qualities. But if your inner space is cultivated with hope, discipline, and compassion, your life becomes a reflection of those virtues. This is what I call the law of the mind, and it is more powerful than most people realize. 1. The seed of thought creates the fruit of reality. Every single thought that passes through your mind is not something random or meaningless. It is a seed, and like every seed, it carries the potential to grow into something far greater than itself. Imagine your consciousness as fertile soil. It does not discriminate between the seeds it receives. If you plant an apple seed, you will eventually harvest apples. If you plant a thorn bush seed, you will eventually find yourself surrounded by thorns. In the same way, the thoughts you continuously entertain, whether they are of fear, jealousy, anger, or hope, kindness, and strength, will grow into experiences that shape your daily life. When you allow negative thoughts like bitterness, envy, or doubt to take root, they grow silently beneath the surface until one day you realize your life feels heavy, conflicted, and suffocating. You might not even remember when you planted those thoughts, but the harvest will remind you that nothing grows in your reality without first being planted in your mind. On the other hand, when you deliberately and consciously plant seeds of kindness, gratitude, compassion, and discipline, your life begins to mirror those qualities. Just like a gardener who waters flowers and pulls out weeds, you become the caretaker of your inner landscape. Over time, you begin to notice more peace, more clarity, and more fulfillment because what you cultivated inside is now blossoming outside. This is why Buddhism emphasizes mindfulness so strongly. Mindfulness is like the careful gardener who watches over the soil of your mind. It notices which seeds have been planted, decides which ones deserve attention, and ensures that destructive weeds are pulled out before they can spread. Without mindfulness, the garden of your mind is left unprotected, and weeds of negativity quickly take over, leaving little room for anything beautiful to grow. Many people, without realizing it, treat their minds like garbage bins. They allow toxic ideas, painful memories, and self-destructive thoughts to pile up, never questioning whether these seeds should remain inside. They consume negativity from others, from social media, from their environment, and without noticing, they carry these seeds within themselves. Days pass, then weeks, and eventually those neglected seeds begin to grow, and their lives reflect conflict, stress, and unhappiness. But the truth is, the soil of the mind is always working. It will grow whatever you plant, whether consciously or unconsciously. This is why becoming aware of your thoughts is the first step to transforming your life. If you start seeing each thought as a seed with consequences, you naturally become more careful about what you allow to remain in your mind. A single seed of hope, when watered daily, can grow into resilience that helps you endure difficulties. A single seed of gratitude, when revisited often, can blossom into a joyful way of living where even small blessings feel abundant. And a single seed of discipline, when planted and nurtured, can grow into a powerful tree that provides shade and strength for every other area of your life. The choice is always yours, whether to grow a garden of peace or a forest of suffering. Over time, you will notice that your outer reality is nothing but a reflection of the inner seeds you have chosen to plant and nurture. Just as no gardener can blame the soil for what grows, you cannot blame life for the results of the seeds you have allowed inside your mind. By becoming mindful and intentional, you step into the role of the master gardener, shaping your reality by consciously choosing which seeds deserve to live and which must be pulled out before they take control. This is the law of the mind. Whatever you plant inside will surely manifest outside. 2. Energy flows where attention goes. One of the deepest truths about the human mind is that whatever you consistently focus on expands and takes on a life of its own. Imagine holding a magnifying glass under the sun. The rays of light are scattered everywhere, but when the glass directs them into a single point, they create enough heat to ignite fire. Your attention works the same way. It concentrates energy. If you focus on worry, fear, and failure, those areas of your life begin to burn brighter, consuming your peace and filling you with anxiety. But if you direct that same attention toward growth, gratitude, and progress, no matter how small, you will begin to see those qualities multiply and strengthen in your life. This principle is not simply positive thinking. It is a natural law of the mind. Whatever you repeatedly give your energy to, whether consciously or unconsciously, becomes stronger. Think about it. When you constantly replay past mistakes, you reinforce the pain associated with them, keeping old wounds alive as if they happened yesterday. When you constantly imagine what could go wrong in the future, your body reacts with stress and fear, even though nothing has happened yet. In both cases, your attention feeds the negative and gives it the power to dominate your experience. But when you choose to focus on progress, even on something as simple as improving by 1% each day, your energy flows into building instead of destroying, and slowly but surely your reality shifts in that direction. Buddhism captures this wisdom in the practice of meditation. A simple act, such as paying attention to your breath, may seem small, but it trains the mind to return again and again to a point of stability. Over time, this focus strengthens qualities like calmness, patience, and resilience. Just as a muscle grows with repeated use, your mind strengthens the qualities it is directed toward. If you focus on anger, anger grows stronger. If you focus on compassion, compassion grows stronger. You cannot escape this truth because the mind will always feed what you choose to nourish with attention. Many people wonder why their lives feel stuck, yet they fail to realize they are pouring all their attention into the very things they don't want, into fears, into complaints, into everything that drains them. It is like watering weeds in a garden and then being surprised when the flowers die. The simple shift lies in deciding each day where your attention will go. Even if your circumstances are difficult, you still have the ability to choose where your mind will rest. If you can place it on gratitude, solutions, and opportunities instead of problems and setbacks, you will begin to see change. Over time, this practice creates a ripple effect. The more you focus on progress, the more progress shows up. The more you focus on blessings, the more blessings you notice. Life begins to mirror the direction of your attention. This is why masters of the mind are careful with what they allow to dominate their focus. They know that attention is not free. It is the most valuable form of energy they possess, and where it flows, life itself grows. So ask yourself, where has your attention been flowing lately? Into fears, regrets, and complaints, or into growth, peace, and purpose? The answer will tell you not only where you are now, but also where you are headed. 3. Your mind is a mirror of your beliefs. Your thoughts are not random visitors that appear out of nowhere. They are reflections of the beliefs you hold about yourself and the world. Imagine your mind as a mirror. It reflects back whatever image is standing in front of it. If you believe you are weak, the mirror will only reflect weakness, and your mind will generate thoughts that align with that belief. You will think things like, "I can't handle this," or "I will fail no matter what I try," and those thoughts will guide your actions in ways that keep you trapped in weakness. On the other hand, if you believe that you are capable of learning, growing, and becoming stronger, The mirror will reflect that as well, and your thoughts will naturally produce encouragement, confidence, and strategies for success. This is why your beliefs are so powerful. They act as the lens that shapes every single thought that passes through your mind. Consider how this works in everyday life. Two people may face the same challenge, say, losing their job. The first person, who holds a belief that life is unfair and stacked against them, will immediately generate thoughts like, "Why does this always happen to me? I will never find something better." Those thoughts create despair, which then leads to giving up. The second person, who believes that they are capable and that challenges can become opportunities, will generate thoughts like, "This is painful, but maybe it's a chance for me to pursue something new." Those thoughts create hope, which leads to action. The situation was the same, but the inner mirror shaped two completely different realities. In Buddhism, this is called right view. Right view is the understanding that your perception of yourself and the world is what determines how your mind operates. If you cling to distorted views, such as "I am not worthy" or "I will always suffer," your thoughts will reflect those distortions and your actions will reinforce them. But if you align yourself with a clearer, truer view, that you are capable of change, that suffering can be transformed into wisdom, that growth is always possible, then your thoughts begin to align with this higher truth. Over time, your reality shifts because you no longer operate from the prison of false beliefs. The danger of false beliefs is that they often hide beneath the surface, quietly shaping your life without you even realizing it. For example, you might have grown up hearing that you are not smart enough or that success is not meant for people like you. Those statements, repeated often enough, become seeds of belief planted deep in your subconscious. Later in life, when opportunities arise, you find yourself hesitating or sabotaging your progress, not because you are incapable, but because your inner mirror is clouded with the reflection of that old belief. The thoughts that arise, "I can't do this," or "I don't deserve this," are not the truth. They are simply the echo of a distorted self-image that you have carried for too long. The way to break free is to become aware of these beliefs and question them. Ask yourself, is this belief absolutely true? Who gave me this belief, and do I want to continue carrying it? When you shine the light of awareness on a belief, you begin to see whether it serves you or imprisons you. Replacing harmful beliefs with empowering ones is like cleaning the mirror of your mind. Once the mirror is clean, your thoughts become clearer, brighter, and more aligned with your true potential. For example, replacing the belief "I am weak" with "I am learning to grow stronger" will immediately change the quality of your thoughts. Instead of defeat, your mind begins to reflect possibilities. Instead of despair, it begins to offer solutions. This is why affirmations and visualization can be powerful tools when used with mindfulness. By repeatedly affirming, "I am capable of growth," or by visualizing yourself succeeding, you are reshaping your inner mirror. Over time, the subconscious accepts the new image, and your thoughts naturally begin to align with it. Buddhism reminds us that this is not about lying to yourself, but about aligning with the deeper truth, that you are not limited to the false images created by fear, society, or past wounds. Your true self is always capable of change, resilience, and wisdom. The mind, in this way, becomes a faithful mirror. It will always reflect back what you truly believe about yourself. If you want different thoughts, you must first create different beliefs. If you want stronger, clearer, and more empowering thoughts, you must first begin to see yourself as someone who is capable of living a stronger, clearer, and more empowered life. Once the inner image shifts, everything else begins to follow. 4. Negative thinking is a silent prison. There are prisons in this world made of iron and concrete, with walls so strong that no ordinary person could escape. But there is another kind of prison that is far more dangerous because its walls are invisible, and yet billions of people live inside it without ever realizing they are imprisoned. This is the prison of negative thinking. Unlike a physical prison, no guard locks you in and no key is needed to open the door. The chains are made only of thoughts, and the bars are built from fear, self-doubt, and despair. The most painful part is that most people do not even see the door standing wide open in front of them. They remain inside because their own thoughts convince them that escape is impossible. Think about how this prison is built. It does not happen in a single day. It begins when you accept one negative thought as truth. Perhaps you told yourself, "I'm not good enough," or "I will never succeed," or "people don't respect me." That single thought plants itself in the soil of your mind, and before long, more thoughts of the same kind appear, gathering together like bricks. You repeat them to yourself so often that you begin to believe them without question, and over time, they form walls around you. Slowly, you stop trying new things because the wall of self-doubt blocks your path. You stop trusting people because the wall of suspicion and fear keeps you apart. You stop dreaming because the wall of hopelessness convinces you that dreams are useless. And without realizing it, you have locked yourself in a prison of your own making. The tragedy is that negative thoughts often feel comfortable, like familiar companions. People hold on to them because they have lived with them for so long that they cannot imagine life without them. Complaining becomes a habit, doubting becomes second nature, and expecting the worst becomes a shield against disappointment. But this comfort is an illusion, because the more you rely on negative thoughts, the more powerless you become. A prisoner who has lived behind bars for decades may be afraid to walk free because the outside world feels unfamiliar. In the same way, many people remain trapped by negativity because they fear what life might look like if they actually believed in their own strength, their own potential, and their own worth. Buddhism teaches us that the mind itself is the root of suffering, not the world outside. Painful things will always happen: loss, rejection, illness, failure. But it is the way we think about these events that determines whether we remain free or remain prisoners. Two people can face the same hardship, yet one suffers endlessly because they interpret it as proof that life is cruel, while the other finds resilience because they see it as an opportunity to grow. The difference is not in the event itself, but in the prison or freedom created by their own thinking. What makes negative thinking so dangerous is that it does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers in small doubts, like, "You're not ready yet, maybe later." Sometimes it disguises itself as caution, saying, "Don't try because you might fail." Sometimes it appears as judgment, both of yourself and others, creating bitterness and resentment. Left unchecked, these thoughts multiply quietly, like weeds in an unattended garden, until they choke out every flower of hope and joy. Escaping this prison begins with awareness. You cannot walk out of a cage you cannot see. The first step is to notice when negative thoughts are arising and to recognize that they are not facts, they are simply mental events passing through your mind. Just because a thought says you will never succeed does not mean it is true. It is just a thought, and like a cloud in the sky, it will pass if you do not hold on to it. The power of mindfulness is that it allows you to create space between yourself and your thoughts. You begin to observe them without becoming them. When you see a thought like, "I am not enough," and instead of believing it, you say, "There is the thought of not being enough," you loosen its chains. You realize that the prison was never locked. It was only maintained by your willingness to obey every negative thought without question. Replacing negative thinking with positive or constructive thinking does not mean you ignore pain or deny reality. It means you stop giving power to thoughts that keep you paralyzed and begin choosing thoughts that move you forward. For example, instead of "I failed, so I'm worthless," you can choose "I failed, but but I can learn and try again. Instead of nobody respects me, you can choose respect begins with how I carry myself. These shifts may seem small, but each time you choose a healthier thought, you chip away at the walls of your prison until eventually the walls crumble and you step into freedom. Buddhism calls this liberation of the mind. Freedom is not about escaping the world. It is about escaping the chains of your own destructive thinking. When you learn to let go of negative thoughts, you discover a lightness you may never have felt before. It is as if you were carrying a heavy bag on your back all your life, filled with stones of anger, jealousy, regret, and fear, and suddenly you set it down. The path forward becomes easier, your steps lighter, your vision clearer. You realize that the prison was never the world outside. It was always the thoughts you chose to keep inside. The truth is that negative thoughts will always arise from time to time. That is the nature of the human mind. But you do not have to let them build walls around you. You can choose to observe them, let them pass, and return your focus to gratitude, compassion, and purpose. Each time you do this, you strengthen your freedom. And when you consistently choose this path, you no longer live as a prisoner. You live as someone who understands that the mind, once mastered, is not a cage, but the doorway to liberation. 5. Stillness unlocks clarity. We live in a time where noise has become the background of our existence. From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, our minds are bombarded with distractions. Phones buzzing with notifications, televisions and social media filling our heads with opinions, and endless responsibilities pulling us in different directions. In this constant storm of noise, it becomes nearly impossible to hear our own inner voice. The result is confusion, stress, and an overwhelming sense that we are lost in the chaos of life. Yet, in the midst of this restless world, there is a timeless truth taught by Buddhism. Clarity does not come from adding more noise, but from finding stillness. Think of a glass of water filled with mud. If you keep stirring it, the mud will continue to cloud the water, making it impossible to see through. But if you set the glass down and let it rest, the mud slowly settles to the bottom and the water becomes clear again. Your mind is exactly like that. When you constantly stir it with endless worries, fears, and distractions, everything becomes muddy and unclear. You cannot see solutions, you cannot see opportunities, and sometimes you cannot even see the truth about yourself. But when you allow your mind to rest, when you cultivate stillness through silence, meditation, or mindful breathing, the confusion begins to settle and clarity naturally emerges. Many people misunderstand stillness, thinking it means laziness, emptiness, or doing nothing. In reality, stillness is one of the most powerful forms of action you can take because it allows you to connect with the wisdom that is already within you. When your mind is restless, even small problems appear large and unmanageable, like shadows that grow bigger under flickering light. But when your mind becomes still, you gain perspective. You see things for what they are, without exaggeration, without distortion. Decisions that once felt impossible become simple. Situations that once filled you with anxiety begin to lose their power over you. Stillness does not erase the challenges of life, but it gives you the clarity to face them with calmness and strength. This is why meditation is considered the heart of Buddhist practice. Sitting in silence, focusing on the breath, and simply observing the mind may sound like a small act, but it is a doorway into freedom. The more you practice stillness, the more you realize that you are not your racing thoughts. You begin to see that thoughts come and go like passing clouds, but you are the sky that remains unchanged. This realization brings an inner peace that no external noise can shake. You stop reacting to every thought as if it were reality, and instead you begin choosing which thoughts deserve your attention. That choice is where clarity is born. Stillness also reveals the truth of impermanence. When you sit quietly, you notice how sensations in the body rise and fade, how thoughts appear and disappear, how emotions surge and dissolve. You begin to understand that nothing in the mind or body is permanent, and this awareness frees you from clinging too tightly to your thoughts and feelings. Instead of drowning in them, you begin to observe them with compassion and patience. This shift alone is life-changing, because clarity is not only about seeing solutions in the outside world, it is also about seeing the truth within yourself. Imagine facing a difficult decision, such as whether to leave a job, end a relationship, or take a leap into something new. When your mind is restless, the fear of making the wrong choice can paralyze you. You overthink every possible outcome, you replay every potential mistake, and in the end, you feel more stuck than before. But if you give yourself the gift of stillness, you allow your inner wisdom to rise above the noise of fear. In silence, you may notice a subtle sense of what feels aligned, what feels heavy, what feels true. That quiet voice of wisdom is often drowned out by the noise of constant thinking, but stillness gives it space to be heard. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found by running away from the world, but by transforming the way we relate to it. In the same way, clarity is not about escaping problems, but about seeing them with a calm and balanced mind. Stillness trains you to respond instead of react, to act with wisdom instead of impulse. Over time, this practice transforms not only your inner life, but also your outer reality. Relationships improve because you no longer speak out of anger or fear. Work improves because you make decisions with clarity instead of confusion. Your health improves because your body is no longer carrying the constant weight of stress. The beauty of stillness is that it does not require special tools or perfect conditions. You do not need a mountain retreat or hours of silence each day. Even a few minutes of mindful breathing, even a short walk taken in awareness, can bring a sense of stillness into your daily life. The key is not the length of time, but the quality of presence you bring. With practice, stillness stops being an activity you do and becomes a way of being. You begin carrying an inner calm with you, even in the busiest environments, like a quiet lake that reflects the sky regardless of the noise around it. Stillness is not the absence of life. It is the ground that allows life to be seen clearly. Without stillness, we live like people lost in a storm, unable to see the path before us. With stillness, the storm may continue, but we find our footing, we see the direction, and we walk with confidence. Clarity arises not because the world changes, but because we have learned to quiet the noise within. And when clarity arises, everything in life, your decisions, your relationships, your purpose, begins to align more naturally with truth. 6. You become the stories you tell yourself. Every human being carries a story within them. Some of these stories are conscious, spoken aloud and repeated daily, while others remain hidden in the subconscious, quietly shaping the way we see ourselves and the world. These stories are not just harmless words or passing thoughts. They are the very scripts that guide our actions, fuel our emotions, and determine the direction of our lives. In a very real sense, you do not live life as it is. You live life as the story you tell yourself about it. And over time, that story becomes your identity, your reality, and your destiny. Think for a moment about the narrative you have been carrying. Perhaps it is a story of limitation, one where you tell yourself that you are not good enough, not smart enough, or not lucky enough. Or maybe it is a story of victimhood, where life is always unfair, and no matter what you do, the world is stacked against you. If this is the story that plays in your mind every day, then your actions, your decisions, and even your expectations will bend themselves to fit that script. You will unconsciously live in ways that prove your story true. This is not because the story is reality, but because the mind, once it accepts a story, will begin to filter all experiences through it. The Buddha once taught that we are shaped by our thoughts and molded by our inner dialogue. If your thoughts are harsh, judgmental, and filled with despair, your inner story will reflect that harshness, and you will walk through life carrying a heavy weight. On the other hand, if your thoughts are compassionate, encouraging, and open to growth, your story becomes a source of strength and resilience, carrying you forward even in difficult times. This is why self-talk is so powerful. The words you whisper to yourself in the silence of your own mind are the most important words you will ever hear, because they are repeated thousands of times, day after day, until they carve deep grooves in your subconscious. And whatever lies in the subconscious will always rise to the surface of your reality. Consider two people starting the same journey. One tells himself the story, "I am not capable, I always fail, and people do not respect me." The other tells himself the story, "I am still learning, but I am capable of growth, and every challenge is a chance to improve." Though they face the same challenges, their experiences will be entirely different. The first person, weighed down by a negative story, will hesitate, make timid choices, and interpret every obstacle as proof of his inadequacy. The second person, guided by a positive story, will act with more courage, interpret failures as lessons, and push forward with resilience. In time, their realities will be worlds apart, not because of luck or external differences, but because of the stories they told themselves along the way. Negative stories are often born from past wounds. Maybe you were told as a child that you were not good enough, and you accepted that statement as part of your story. Maybe you faced rejection in a relationship or failure in a career, and instead of seeing it as one moment in time, you wove it into your identity, saying, "I am unlovable," or "I am a failure." Over the years, these stories became so familiar that you stopped questioning them, and they became the invisible script that dictates your choices. Yet Buddhism teaches us that the self is not fixed. It is constantly changing, constantly flowing, like a river. Just as water does not remain in one place, you are not bound to the stories of your past. The problem is not that you experienced pain or failure. The problem is that you allowed those moments to become the entire story of who you are. The good news is that stories can be rewritten. You are not a prisoner of your past narratives. You are the author, whether you realize it or not. Every day you tell yourself something about who you are, and with mindfulness, you can begin to change that script. Imagine waking up each morning and deliberately choosing to tell yourself, "I am capable of growth. I am worthy of peace. I am not defined by my past. I am defined by the choices I make today." At first, it may feel forced, especially if you have been carrying a negative story for years. But with repetition, your subconscious begins to accept the new script. Slowly, your thoughts align with it, your actions reflect it, and your reality begins to change. This is not about blind positivity or pretending life is perfect. It is about recognizing that you always have a choice in the story you tell yourself about what happens. Failure does not have to mean, "I am worthless." It can mean, "I am learning." Rejection does not have to mean, "I am unlovable." It can mean, "This was not my path, but there is something better waiting." Even suffering itself does not have to mean, "My life is meaningless." It can mean, "Through this pain, I am discovering strength and compassion." The external event is the same, but the story you attach to it changes everything. This is why Buddhism emphasizes detachment from fixed identities. When you cling to a rigid story about yourself, you close the door to growth. If your story is, "I am weak," then no matter how many opportunities arise, you will interpret them through weakness. But if you loosen your grip on old stories, you create space for new ones. You begin to live in the truth of impermanence, recognizing that who you are is not fixed, but evolving. In that space, you can choose to tell stories that empower rather than imprison you. Think of the stories you tell yourself right now. Are they helping you grow, or are they keeping you small? Do they encourage you to step into your potential, or do they hold you back in fear? If your story is one of limitation, it is time to question it. Ask yourself, who gave me this story? Did I choose it, or did I inherit it from someone else's words, someone else's judgments, someone else's pain? If the story is not serving you, you have the right and the responsibility to rewrite it. Rewriting your story does not mean erasing your past. It means reframing it. It means looking at your failures and saying, yes, I stumbled, but those stumbles made me wiser. It means looking at your pain and saying, yes, I suffered, but that suffering taught me compassion. It means looking at your flaws and saying, yes, I am imperfect, but within my imperfection lies the opportunity to grow. When you rewrite your story this way, you take control of the narrative, and instead of being dragged by it, you begin to guide it. In practical terms, this process begins with awareness. Notice the words you use when you talk about yourself, both aloud and in silence. Do you often say, I can't, I always fail, or nothing ever works out for me? If so, those words are reinforcing a story that keeps you stuck. Replace them with words that open possibilities. I am learning. I am improving. I am finding my way. The more you repeat these phrases, the more your subconscious begins to build a new story around them. And once your subconscious changes, your reality follows. This is the power of self-talk. It may seem small, even trivial, but it is the foundation of the life you live. A mind that constantly tells itself a story of defeat will live in defeat, no matter how much potential it has. A mind that tells itself a story of growth will live in growth, no matter how many setbacks it faces. Your story becomes your destiny, and you always have the ability to rewrite it. In the end, Buddhism teaches us that liberation is not found in clinging to stories, even positive ones, but in realizing that you are more than any story. You are not the fixed character you imagine. You are the awareness behind it, the observer who can step outside the narrative and choose again. But before reaching that ultimate freedom, the first step is to recognize the stories that imprison you and begin telling new ones that lead you toward peace, wisdom, and compassion. So remember this: you become the stories you tell yourself. Choose them wisely, for they will shape not only your thoughts and actions, but the very life you live. If you want to change your destiny, change your story. If you want to live with strength, peace, and freedom, begin today by rewriting the script of your mind. Liberation comes from mastery of thought. There are many forms of power in this world. The power of wealth can buy comfort. The power of influence can sway opinions, and the power of physical strength can overcome obstacles. But above all these, there exists a power far greater, though often overlooked, the power of mastering one's own mind. This is the kind of power that no one can take from you, the kind of freedom that no external circumstance can destroy. Buddhism has always taught that true liberation does not come from controlling the world outside of you, but from mastering the world within you. And at the center of that mastery lies the ability to guide, shape, and transform your thoughts. The untrained mind is like a wild horse. It runs wherever it pleases, dragging the rider along, crashing through obstacles, and creating chaos. One moment it is filled with hope, the next it is drowning in fear. One moment it feels strong, the next it collapses under the weight of doubt. If you live under the rule of such a mind, you will always be at its mercy, tossed around like a leaf in the wind. But when you learn to master your thoughts, you become the rider who takes hold of the reins, guiding the horse with calm authority. The energy is still there, but now it moves with purpose, strength, and clarity. To master your thoughts does not mean you never experience negativity again. Even the wisest monk, the most disciplined warrior, and the most enlightened soul will still have moments when fear, anger, or sadness arise. The difference is that they do not let these thoughts control them. They observe them, they understand them, and they let them pass without clinging. Mastery is not about silencing the mind. It is about no longer being enslaved by it. The Buddha described this state as freedom from suffering, not because life becomes free of pain, but because the mind is no longer trapped in the endless cycle of reacting to every thought and emotion. Think of how much suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the way our minds respond to them. Someone criticizes you, and immediately your mind floods with anger, replaying the insult again and again, long after the moment has passed. You make a mistake, and instead of learning from it, your mind traps you in self-criticism, whispering that you are a failure. You face uncertainty about the future, and your mind weaves endless scenarios of disaster, keeping you awake at night. None of these things exist outside of your thoughts. They live entirely in the stories your mind creates. When you master your thoughts, you no longer let these stories dictate your reality. You begin to live with freedom because you finally understand that your thoughts are not commands. You can choose which ones to follow. This mastery begins with awareness. Imagine sitting quietly and noticing the stream of thoughts passing through your mind. You may hear, "I am not enough. This will never work. What if I fail?" In the past, you might have automatically believed these thoughts, letting them shape your emotions and actions. But with awareness, you step back and see them for what they are, just thoughts, not truths. A thought is like a cloud passing through the sky. Some are dark, heavy, and stormy, others are light and harmless. But none of them are the sky itself. You are the sky. When you recognize this, you stop clinging to every cloud, and you realize that your thoughts do not define you. They are events happening in the mind, and you have the choice to observe them without being ruled by them. The second step to mastery is discipline. Awareness alone is not enough. You must also train the mind the way a craftsman trains his hands or a warrior trains his body. This is why meditation is such a powerful practice. Every time you bring your focus back to the breath, every time you catch your mind wandering and gently guide it back, you are strengthening your mental discipline. It is like lifting weights for the mind. At first, it feels difficult, even frustrating, but with practice, the mind becomes stronger, steadier, and more obedient. You begin to notice that negative thoughts arise less frequently, and when they do, they no longer have the same grip on you. Mastery of thought also requires intentional cultivation. It is not enough to avoid negative thinking. You must also plant seeds of positive, constructive, and empowering thoughts. If you spend your days telling yourself, "I am incapable, I am weak, I am hopeless," then no amount of awareness will help unless you begin replacing those thoughts with healthier ones. This does not mean lying to yourself with empty affirmations. It means speaking to yourself with honesty, compassion, and encouragement. Instead of saying, "I cannot do this," you say, "I will try and I will learn." Instead of saying, "I am worthless," you say, "I am imperfect, but I am growing." These small shifts may not seem powerful at first, but over time, they reshape your inner landscape and your outer reality follows. Think of the greatest challenges you have faced in life. Were they not made harder by the stories your mind told you about them? A rejection became unbearable, not simply because someone walked away, but because your mind whispered, "I will never be loved." A failure became crushing not because you stumbled, but because your mind declared, "This proves I am worthless." The event was one moment in time, but your thoughts turned it into a lifelong wound. When you master your thoughts, you stop letting them turn every challenge into a catastrophe. Instead, you see events for what they are: temporary, manageable, and often opportunities in disguise. This perspective alone is liberating. Buddhism often speaks of liberation as freedom from attachment, but attachment is not only to possessions or relationships, it is also to thoughts. When you cling to the thought, "I must always succeed," you suffer when you fail. When you cling to the thought, "I must be loved by everyone," you suffer when people reject you. Liberation means letting go of these attachments, seeing thoughts as passing phenomena, and living with freedom regardless of whether they align with your desires. This is the true mastery of thought, not controlling what arises, but choosing how you relate to it. Imagine living this way. Someone insults you, and instead of being consumed by anger, you notice the thought arise, "I should fight back," but you let it pass. A challenge appears, and instead of drowning in self-doubt, you notice the thought, "I cannot handle this," but you do not give it power. Fear arises about the future, but instead of spiraling into panic, you breathe, you observe, and you let the fear move through you like wind through the trees. In this state, you are no longer a prisoner of your thoughts, you are their master. Life still brings storms, but the storms no longer sweep you away because you have found the calm center within. This mastery is not achieved overnight. It requires patience, discipline, and compassion for yourself. There will be days when the mind feels restless and noisy, when negative thoughts seem to win. But even in those moments, every small act of awareness is a victory. Each time you catch yourself before falling into old patterns, each time you replace a destructive thought with a constructive one, each time you return to stillness instead of reacting blindly, you are strengthening your mastery. Over months and years, these small victories accumulate, and one day you realize that the prison you once lived in has disappeared. Not because the world changed, but because your relationship with your thoughts changed. The Buddha said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." This is the essence of liberation. When you let your thoughts run wild, you become a prisoner. But when you master your thoughts, you become free. This freedom is not theoretical. It is real, practical, and life-changing. It means waking up each day without being chained by yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's fears. It means walking through challenges with calmness, responding with wisdom instead of impulse. It means living with peace even in the midst of chaos, because you have discovered the one power that can never be taken from you, the mastery of your own mind. So remember this. The greatest liberation is not found in wealth, power, or even in the approval of others. The greatest liberation is found when you are no longer a slave to your thoughts. When you reach that point, you discover that you were never truly imprisoned. The prison was always an illusion created by the mind. And once you see through that illusion, nothing in this world can bind you again. The mind is the silent architect of destiny. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning to the final moments before you fall asleep at night, your mind is working. It never truly rests. Even when you sleep, it weaves dreams, sorts memories, and whispers stories beneath the surface. Every decision you make, every reaction you give, every step you take begins first as a thought. The house you live in, the job you work in, the relationships you maintain, and the life you call your own are all built brick by brick through the thoughts you have allowed to live inside your mind. The world outside may appear to shape you, but in truth, it is the silent work of your mind that builds your destiny. Think of your mind as an architect. An architect draws blueprints long before a building rises from the ground. The structure may not exist yet, but the design is already laid out in detail, waiting to be built. In the same way, your life is a structure being built on the foundation of the blueprints your mind has drawn. Every thought you nurture adds a line to the blueprint. Every belief you hold lays down another foundation stone. Over time, the house of your life is constructed exactly as the mind designed it. If your blueprint is filled with fear, self-doubt, and limitation, your life will reflect those designs. You will live in a house of struggle, insecurity, and regret. But if your blueprint is drawn with courage, compassion, and resilience, you will live in a house that stands tall even in the storms of life. Buddhism reminds us again and again that reality is shaped by perception. The Buddha's teaching, "We are what we think." All that we are arises with our thoughts. "With our thoughts we make the world" is not poetry, it is a direct statement of truth. When you understand this, you begin to see that destiny is not something written by chance or controlled by external forces. It is built silently by the mind, one thought at a time. The tragedy is that many people never realize they are the architects of their own lives. They live as if they are powerless, as if destiny is something handed down to them, as if their only choice is to accept whatever is given. But in reality, they are building their future every day through the thoughts they allow to dominate their mind. Imagine a person who constantly thinks, "I am unlucky, nothing ever works out for me, people don't care about me." These thoughts may feel like reflections of reality, but in truth, they are blueprints for what will come. Such a person will unconsciously make choices that confirm those thoughts. They may avoid opportunities because they believe failure is inevitable. They may push people away because they expect rejection. They may complain so often that others grow distant, confirming their belief that no one cares. Their destiny unfolds exactly as their thoughts designed it. Now imagine another person who tells themselves, "I am learning, I am growing, and even setbacks are part of my journey." Their mind creates a completely different blueprint. They see failures not as proof of worthlessness, but as steps toward improvement. They remain open to people, believing that kindness exists. They take opportunities, trusting that even if they stumble, they will learn something valuable. Over time, their destiny unfolds into growth, strength, and fulfillment. Same world, same challenges, but two completely different lives because of the silent architect working behind the scenes. The problem is that most of us allow our architect to draw unconsciously. We do not question the thoughts that enter our minds. We accept them as truth and let them build the blueprint. If a teacher once told you, "You'll never amount to anything," that thought may have lodged itself into your subconscious. Without realizing it, you carry it into adulthood, and every time you face a challenge, the thought whispers, "Remember, you're not good enough." You act accordingly, and your life reflects the blueprint of someone who believes they cannot succeed. This is how destiny becomes shaped not by truth, but by old, unchallenged stories. Mastery of the mind means becoming a conscious architect. It means picking up the pen and drawing your own blueprints with awareness, instead of letting random negative thoughts scribble them for you. This is where mindfulness becomes so powerful. When you are mindful, you notice the thoughts as they arise, and you decide whether they deserve space in your blueprint. You no longer allow every thought to dictate your life. Instead, you ask, does this thought serve me? Does it build a life of peace and growth, or does it reinforce suffering and limitation? When you ask these questions, you begin to take control of your destiny. Think of how this applies in relationships. If your inner architect designs with thoughts like, "People can't be trusted, everyone will betray me," you will create a life filled with isolation, mistrust, and loneliness. But if you design with thoughts like, "I will approach people with honesty and kindness, and while not everyone will stay, the right people will remain," then your relationships reflect openness, trust, and authenticity. In career, if your blueprint is, "I will fail because I am not capable," you will not take risks, and your path will remain stagnant. But if your blueprint is, "I can learn, I can adapt, I can grow into new roles," you will step into opportunities, and your career will expand. The mind is always at work, silently constructing the framework of your life, whether you guide it or not. Buddhism also teaches us about impermanence, and this truth is crucial when it comes to the architecture of the mind. Just because your life has been built on one blueprint until now does not mean it must remain that way forever. You can always redesign. You can always tear down old walls of limiting beliefs and build new ones. This is why the path of transformation is always open, no matter your age or circumstances. A person who has spent decades telling themselves a negative story can, through awareness and discipline, begin telling a new story, drawing a new blueprint, and slowly but surely building a new reality. The walls may not change overnight, but brick by brick, thought by thought, the house of your life can be rebuilt. It is important to remember that mastery of the mind is not about forcing yourself to think only positive thoughts. That approach often fails because the mind is naturally diverse. It will always produce both light and dark, hope and fear, courage and doubt. The goal is not to silence all negative thoughts, but to learn how to relate to them. When fear arises, do not let it draw your blueprint. When doubt arises, observe it, but do not let it dictate your design. Instead, choose thoughts of resilience, kindness, and wisdom as the ones worthy of building your life. This is the difference between unconscious living and conscious creation. Consider the metaphor of a temple. For centuries, humans have built temples not only as places of worship, but also as symbols of devotion, discipline, and purpose. Your mind is building such a temple right now. Every thought is a stone placed into the structure. Every belief is a pillar that holds it up. Every repeated story becomes an inscription carved into its walls. If you allow anger, fear, and self-hatred to be the materials, your temple will be dark and crumbling, a place that offers no peace. But if you choose compassion, discipline, and gratitude as your building blocks, your temple will become a place of strength, serenity, and wisdom. And here is the truth. You are the builder. The temple of your mind will be built regardless, but its form depends entirely on the thoughts you choose to use as its materials. This is why liberation is tied so closely to mastery of thought. When you stop being a prisoner of unconscious blueprints, you step into freedom. You realize that destiny is not something you wait for, it is something you build. You are no longer at the mercy of old wounds, false beliefs, or random thoughts that once controlled you. Instead, you take responsibility for your design. You begin to say, I will not let fear design my future. I will not let doubt build my house. I will not let anger carve the walls of my temple. Instead, I will choose thoughts that reflect the life I want to live, the person I want to become, and the peace I want to carry. The greatest tragedy is not failure or rejection. It is living an entire life without realizing that you were the architect all along. People spend years blaming others for their circumstances, waiting for luck, or hoping destiny will change by chance, when in truth the blueprint has always been in their hands. The freedom to design has always been within them. Mastery of the mind does not mean controlling every detail of life, but it means taking charge of the one thing that truly shapes it, your thoughts. So ask yourself now, what kind of house am I building with my thoughts? What blueprints am I allowing to guide my life? Are they drawn with wisdom, compassion, and resilience, or are they scribbled with fear, doubt, and regret? The answer is written not in your intentions, but in the thoughts you feed each day. And the good news is that at any moment, you can pick up the pen and begin again. The mind is the silent architect of destiny. Whether you let it build unconsciously or guide it with awareness will determine the shape of your life. Liberation begins when you take hold of the blueprint and design with purpose. And when you do, you will find that destiny is not something waiting for you in the future. It is something you are building right now, one thought at a time. Freedom begins when you realize you are not your thoughts. From the moment we are born, the mind becomes our constant companion. It never leaves us, not for a single day. It speaks when we are alone. It comments while we are with others. It judges. It remembers. It anticipates, and it never seems to stop. For most people, this constant voice becomes their identity. They say, "This is me." These thoughts are who I am, yet one of the most liberating truths taught by Buddhism is that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that observes them. Freedom begins the moment you understand this distinction, because until then you remain a prisoner, chained to every passing idea, every wave of fear, every storm of doubt, every shadow of regret. Think about how much of your suffering comes not from reality itself, but from the way your mind interprets reality. You fail at something, and instead of simply acknowledging the failure and learning from it, your mind whispers, "I am a failure." You face rejection in a relationship, and instead of accepting that someone walked away, your mind says, "I am unworthy of love." You feel fear about the future, and instead of seeing it as a natural response to uncertainty, your mind convinces you, "I will never be safe." The events themselves pass quickly, but the thoughts about them linger and multiply, wrapping you in chains. Without realizing it, you begin to live not in reality, but in the prison built by your own interpretations. The mind is powerful, but it is not always truthful. It is shaped by memories, beliefs, fears, and expectations, many of which are distorted or incomplete. It can replay an insult from 10 years ago as if it just happened today. It can invent disasters that never occur. It can convince you to give up before you even begin. And if you mistake these thoughts for truth, you will suffer endlessly. But when you step back and realize, these are not facts, these are thoughts passing through, you gain freedom. You are no longer dragged by the current, you are the observer watching the river flow. This is why mindfulness is so transformative. When you practice mindfulness, you are not trying to stop thoughts. You are training yourself to see them for what they are, temporary, fleeting, and often unreliable. Imagine sitting quietly and noticing a thought like, "I am not good enough." In the past, you may have believed it immediately, letting it shape your mood and your day. But with mindfulness, you pause and say, "There is the thought of not being good enough." Just that small shift changes everything. You are no longer inside the thought, you are observing it. You realize it is just one of countless thoughts your mind produces, and you can choose not to follow it. Buddhism uses the metaphor of clouds in the sky. Thoughts are clouds. They come and go. They change shape. They drift in and out. Sometimes they are dark and heavy, sometimes light and harmless. But you are not the clouds. You are the sky itself, vast, unchanging and free. When you identify with every thought, you live as if you are the cloud, constantly shifting, restless and unstable. But when you realize you are the sky, you remain steady no matter what clouds pass through. This is the essence of liberation. Consider how this plays out in daily life. A person who believes they are their thoughts may feel anger arise and immediately lash out because the thought, "I must fight back," feels like an order. Another person who has cultivated awareness may feel the same anger but pauses, observes it, and chooses not to act on it. The anger still arose, but it did not control them. One lives as a prisoner, the other as a master. The difference is not in the presence of thoughts, but in the relationship to them. This mastery of thought does not mean you suppress or deny what arises. Suppression is another form of attachment, and it often makes thoughts stronger. Instead, mastery means allowing thoughts to come, observing them without clinging, and letting them pass naturally. Imagine sitting by a road and watching cars drive by. Each car is a thought. Some are noisy and unpleasant. Some are beautiful and attractive. But you do not have to climb into every car that passes. You can simply sit and watch. When you live this way, thoughts lose their power to drag you into suffering. But why do so many people remain trapped? Because they have never learned to distinguish between themselves and their thoughts. They believe the voice in their head is who they are. If the mind says, "You are worthless," they believe it. If the mind says, "You will fail," they obey. If the mind says, "Life is hopeless," they sink into despair. They do not see that the mind is simply generating thoughts based on past conditioning, fears, and habits. It is like a storyteller who never stops talking, weaving tales of doom and glory, hope and fear. If you believe the storyteller is truth itself, you will be controlled by its stories. But if you realize it is only a storyteller, you can listen without being enslaved. This awareness opens the door to freedom. Suddenly, you see that you do not have to believe every thought. You do not have to act on every impulse. You do not have to identify with every story your mind tells. You can choose which thoughts to nurture and which to let pass. You can choose to feed gratitude instead of complaint, courage instead of fear, compassion instead of judgment. Each time you make this choice, you strengthen your freedom until eventually your mind becomes a servant instead of a master. Buddhism calls this liberation of the mind, and it is the essence of the path to enlightenment. When you no longer identify with every thought, suffering loses its grip on you. Pain may still arise, illness, loss, failure, but the extra suffering created by the mind's endless commentary fades away. You feel the pain, but you do not add the story. This pain means my life is ruined. You experience rejection, but you do not add the story. This proves I am unworthy. You feel fear, but you do not add the story. This fear means I will never be safe. Without those stories, suffering cannot take root. You begin to live with lightness, even in the midst of challenge. This shift does not happen instantly. At first, the voice of the mind is loud, persuasive, and relentless. But with practice, you learn to recognize it for what it is. Through meditation, you sit quietly and watch the thoughts arise and fade again and again until you realize their impermanence. Through mindfulness, you observe your reactions in daily life, catching yourself before you get pulled into old patterns. Slowly, the grip of the mind loosens, and you experience moments of true freedom. At first, they may be brief, a moment of choosing calm instead of anger, a moment of choosing gratitude instead of complaint. But over time, those moments expand until freedom becomes your natural state. Imagine the peace of living this way. The mind may still produce fear, but you no longer live in fear. It may still produce anger, but you no longer drown in it. It may still produce doubt, but you no longer obey it. You begin to live from a deeper place, the place of awareness itself, untouched by the storms of thought. This is what it means to master the law of the mind. You do not silence the storyteller, but you stop mistaking its stories for reality. In truth, this is the highest form of liberation. Wealth can be taken, status can be lost, relationships can end, but once you realize you are not your thoughts, no one can imprison you again. You may face challenges, but you will never again be enslaved by the voice in your head. You become free in the deepest sense, because you have discovered that your true self is not the noise of the mind, but the vast, silent awareness behind it. So remember this: freedom does not begin when the world changes. It begins when you realize you are not your thoughts. You are not the storm. You are the sky. You are not the prison. You are the key. And when you live with this understanding, you walk through life with peace, clarity, and strength. No longer a prisoner of the mind, but a master of it. The true power lies in choosing your thoughts wisely. Every day, from the moment the sun rises to the time you close your eyes at night, thousands upon thousands of thoughts pass through your mind. Some are fleeting and harmless, like the sound of birds or the memory of a meal. Others are heavier, old regrets, fresh worries, fears about the future, doubts about yourself. Most people never pause to notice this stream of thoughts. They simply go along with it, letting one thought lead to another until hours, days, and even years of their lives are guided by unconscious patterns. Yet the truth is this: while you may not control every thought that arises, you always hold the power to choose which thoughts you give your attention, which ones you nurture, and which ones you let go. This choice, though subtle, is the most powerful ability you possess, because the thoughts you choose become the foundation of your destiny. Think about it. Every action you take begins first as a thought. The decision to work hard, to speak kindly, to pursue a dream, or even to give up, all of these are born in the mind long before they appear in the world. A person who chooses to feed thoughts of discipline eventually builds a life of stability. A person who chooses to feed thoughts of compassion creates relationships of trust and love. A person who chooses to feed thoughts of fear and doubt slowly shapes a life of limitation. In this way, your mind is like fertile soil. It will grow whatever seeds you plant in it, whether weeds or flowers, whether bitterness or joy. The soil does not decide, it simply accepts. The responsibility of choosing what seeds to plant lies entirely with you. Yet many people fail to realize this responsibility. They complain about their lives while continuing to water seeds of anger, jealousy, and despair. They wonder why they remain stuck while their minds are filled with stories of failure and hopelessness. Imagine a farmer who plants thorn bushes every season and then complains that he never harvests fruit. It sounds foolish, yet this is exactly what happens when we allow negative thoughts to dominate our minds and then wonder why life feels so empty. The truth is simple but demanding. If you want a life of peace, you must choose thoughts of peace. If you want growth, you must choose thoughts of resilience. If you want love, you must choose thoughts of kindness. There is no way around this law. Buddhism emphasizes this truth in the practice of mindfulness and right thought. Right thought does not mean forcing yourself to think only pleasant things or denying reality. It means choosing thoughts that align with wisdom and compassion, thoughts that guide you toward growth instead of destruction. For example, when anger arises, right thought might be, "This anger is here, but I will not let it harm myself or others." When fear arises, right thought might be, "I feel fear, but I will face this challenge with courage." In this way, you do not deny negative thoughts, but you also do not obey them blindly. You choose how to relate to them, and in doing so, you transform them. This choice may seem small in the moment, but over time it becomes the difference between two very different lives. Consider two people facing the same obstacle, losing a job. The first person chooses thoughts of despair. "I will never recover. I am worthless. Life is unfair." Those thoughts paralyze them, preventing action, and their life spirals downward. The second person chooses thoughts of resilience. This is painful, but it is also an opportunity to grow, to explore new paths, to become stronger. Those thoughts fuel action, encourage persistence, and eventually lead to new possibilities. The same event, two different choices of thought, two entirely different destinies. What makes choosing your thoughts so powerful is that it shifts the balance of control. Most people live as if their minds are wild horses, dragging them in whatever direction emotions demand. But when you consciously choose your thoughts, you become the rider holding the reins. The horse may still be strong, restless, even unpredictable, but you guide it where you want to go. You stop being a victim of the mind and instead become its master. This is liberation in action, not freedom from life's challenges, but freedom from being controlled by unconscious thinking. It is important to understand that mastery does not mean perfection. No one can control every thought that arises. Even the most disciplined monk will still face moments of fear, doubt, or anger. But the difference lies in what happens next. Do you feed the thought and let it grow, or do you acknowledge it and let it pass? This choice, repeated again and again, shapes the path of your life. A single negative thought may not destroy you, just as one weed does not ruin a garden. But if you allow weeds to multiply unchecked, they will soon overwhelm the flowers. In the same way, if you continually feed negative thoughts, they will shape your character, your habits, and eventually your destiny. Science today confirms what Buddhism has taught for centuries. The brain rewires itself according to repeated patterns of thought. This is called neuroplasticity. The more you think a thought, the stronger the pathway becomes in your brain, making it easier for that thought to arise again. This is why habits of mind, both good and bad, feel so powerful. If you constantly feed thoughts of worry, your brain becomes wired to worry automatically. But if you consistently choose thoughts of gratitude, your brain becomes wired to notice blessings more easily. Over time, the very structure of your brain changes according to the choices you make in your thinking. This is why choosing your thoughts wisely is not only a spiritual teaching, but a scientific truth. So how do you begin to make better choices? The first step is awareness. You cannot choose if you are not aware of what is happening. Begin noticing the thoughts that dominate your mind. Do they inspire courage, or do they drain your strength? Do they build compassion, or do they fuel resentment? Do they encourage growth, or do they keep you stuck in fear? Once you are aware, the second step is intention. Intentionally shift your attention to thoughts that serve you. If your mind says, "I cannot do this," gently shift it to, "I will try, and through trying, I will learn." If your mind says, "Nobody cares about me," shift it to, "I will show kindness to others, and I will attract kindness in return." These may feel small at first, but small shifts repeated daily create profound transformation. The third step is practice. Just as a musician trains daily to master an instrument, or an athlete trains daily to master the body, you must train daily to master your thoughts. This is where meditation becomes invaluable. Each time you bring your wandering mind back to the breath, you are practicing the skill of choosing. You are training yourself not to follow every distraction, but to return again and again to what you have chosen. Over time, this practice strengthens your ability to choose thoughts in everyday life, even in the face of difficulty. Imagine what your life would look like if you consistently chose thoughts of growth, peace, and compassion. Challenges would still arise, but instead of being crushed by them, you would see them as teachers. Failures would still occur, but instead of defining you, they would refine you. Pain would still visit, but instead of drowning you, it would deepen your wisdom. This is the power of choosing thoughts wisely. It does not remove hardship, but it transforms hardship into the soil where strength and clarity grow. It is also important to be patient with yourself. The mind has been conditioned over many years, and change takes time. There will be days when negative thoughts seem overwhelming, days when you fall back into old patterns. But do not see this as failure, see it as part of the training. Each time you return to awareness and make a better choice, you are strengthening the habit of mastery. Over months and years, these small victories accumulate, and one day you look back and realize that the story of your life has completely changed. Not because the world outside changed, but because the thoughts you chose reshaped the world inside. Buddhism calls this process liberation, and it is the essence of the path. Liberation is not a single moment of enlightenment that suddenly erases all problems. It is the gradual freeing of yourself from the chains of unconscious thinking until one day you realize you are no longer a slave to your thoughts. You have become their master. And when that day comes, you experience a freedom deeper than wealth, stronger than power, and more enduring than any external success. So remember this: the true power of your life lies not in the circumstances you face, but in the thoughts you choose to entertain. You may not control which thoughts arise, but you always control which ones you feed. And the ones you feed will shape your destiny. If you want peace, choose peaceful thoughts. If you want strength, choose resilient thoughts. If you want love, choose compassionate thoughts. This is the law of the mind, unchanging and universal. And when you live by it, you discover that the key to transformation has always been in your hands. The mind shapes your world through the lens of perception. Every human being believes they see the world as it truly is. When you open your eyes in the morning, You assume the sights, sounds, and experiences around you are objective, solid, and unchanging. Yet Buddhism teaches a profound truth. The world you experience is not the world as it truly is, but the world filtered through your mind. What you see, hear, and feel is always shaped by your perceptions, your beliefs, and your mental habits. In this way, your mind does not simply reflect reality, it creates it. The way you perceive life determines whether you live in peace or in suffering, whether you see obstacles or opportunities, whether you carry despair or hope. Consider two people walking through the same forest. The first, filled with anxiety, perceives the forest as threatening. The shadows seem dangerous, every sound feels like a warning, and they cannot enjoy the beauty because their mind is clouded with fear. The second, calm and mindful, perceives the forest as peaceful. The rustling leaves are music, the shade is comfort, and every tree feels like a friend. The forest has not changed, but the experience of it is completely different because of the lens of perception. In the same way, life itself is neutral. It is our mind that adds meaning, and the meaning we add becomes the world we live in. This is why two people can experience the same hardship, yet come away with completely different lessons. One loses their job and sinks into despair, believing life is cruel and unfair. Another loses their job and uses the moment as an opportunity to grow, to seek new skills, to discover hidden strengths. The event is the same, but the inner lens determines whether it becomes a story of defeat or a story of transformation. In this sense, you are never trapped by events. You are trapped by the way your mind perceives them. When you change your perception, you change your world. The Buddha taught that perception is shaped by mental conditioning. From childhood, we inherit beliefs from parents, teachers, and society. We are told who we are, what we can achieve, what is possible, and what is not. These ideas, repeated over and over, settle deep into the subconscious, and without realizing it, they become the lens through which we see everything. If you grew up hearing you are not capable, you may perceive challenges as impossible, even when you are strong enough to face them. If you grew up hearing you are worthy of love, you may perceive relationships with trust and openness. The outer world has not changed, but your perception shapes the way you engage with it. Buddhism warns us that clinging to false perceptions is one of the root causes of suffering. When you mistake your thoughts for reality, you become enslaved by illusions. Imagine a person who sees rejection as proof they are unworthy. In truth, rejection is simply a person walking away, but their mind adds layers of interpretation, creating suffering that goes far beyond the event itself. Or imagine someone who faces failure and perceives it as the end, not as a step in the learning process. Their perception robs them of growth. These misperceptions are like wearing dirty glasses. You see everything through a distorted lens, and until you clean those glasses, life will always appear darker than it really is. So how do you clean the lens of perception? The first step is awareness. Begin noticing not just what happens, but how your mind interprets it. When something goes wrong, ask yourself, what story am I telling about this event? Is it the only possible story? For example, if a friend cancels plans, your mind might say, they don't value me. But another story could be, they are busy and it has nothing to do with my worth. By questioning your perception, you loosen its grip. You realize that your suffering often comes not from the event itself, but from the meaning you attach to it. The second step is mindfulness. When you practice mindfulness, you create space between the event and your reaction. Instead of instantly believing your first interpretation, you pause, breathe, and observe. This pause allows you to see more clearly. Perhaps the criticism you received was not an attack, but a chance to improve. Perhaps the delay in your plans is not a punishment, but a redirection towards something better. Mindfulness clears away the haze of automatic judgments, allowing you to perceive reality with greater wisdom. The third step is compassion. Perception is not only about how you see yourself, but also how you see others. When your mind is clouded with anger, you may perceive others as enemies, even when they are not. When your mind is filled with compassion, you perceive others with understanding, even when they hurt you. Buddhism teaches that compassion softens the lens, allowing you to see the humanity in others instead of only their flaws. A compassionate perception turns conflicts into opportunities for connection and misunderstandings into chances for forgiveness. Over time, the way you choose to perceive life shapes your destiny. If you consistently perceive difficulties as opportunities, your life becomes a journey of growth. If you perceive them as punishments, your life becomes a prison of suffering. If you perceive yourself as weak, you will act weak. If you perceive yourself as capable, you will act with strength. The outer world does not change, but your inner perception determines the quality of your experience. Buddhism illustrates this with the metaphor of the two arrows. When life brings pain, it is like being struck with the first arrow. This arrow is inevitable. Everyone experiences pain, loss, failure, and disappointment. But most people also shoot themselves with the second arrow, their perception of the pain. They add thoughts like, "This should not happen, I cannot handle this, my life is ruined." The second arrow creates suffering far greater than the first. Mastery of perception means refusing to shoot yourself with that second arrow. You feel the pain, but you do not add the story that magnifies it. In doing so, you experience freedom, even in the midst of hardship. Science today echoes this truth. Research in psychology shows that perception shapes reality. People who believe they are capable perform better, not because they are inherently stronger, but because their perception changes their actions. People who perceive stress as harmful suffer more, while those who perceive stress as a challenge perform better and recover faster. The outer circumstances are the same, but the inner lens determines the outcome. Buddhism understood this centuries ago. Perception is not passive, it is creative. It builds the reality you live in. So what does it mean to live with a purified perception? It means seeing reality as it is, without distortion, without clinging, without fear. It means perceiving challenges as teachers, not punishments. It means perceiving yourself not as fixed and limited, but as flowing and capable of growth. It means perceiving others not as enemies or competitors, but as fellow travelers on the path of life. Such perception does not ignore pain, but it sees through the illusion that pain equals suffering. It does not deny imperfection, but it sees imperfection as part of the journey. It does not cling to identity, but it recognizes the truth of impermanence, that everything changes, and therefore nothing can imprison you forever. Imagine living this way. Each morning, instead of perceiving the day as a burden, you perceive it as a gift. Each challenge, instead of being a wall, becomes a doorway. Each failure, instead of ending your path, becomes a stepping stone. Each person you meet, instead of being a threat, becomes an opportunity to practice compassion. This is not fantasy. It is the reality available when you train your mind to choose perception wisely. In the end, liberation does not come from changing the world outside. It comes from changing the lens through which you see it. When you master perception, you realize that peace is not found in perfect circumstances, but in a clear mind. You realize that joy is not the absence of problems, but the presence of wisdom in how you see them. And you realize that freedom is not escaping challenges, but perceiving them in a way that no longer enslaves you. So remember this: the mind shapes your world through perception. If your lens is clouded with fear, anger, or doubt, the world will appear dark. But if your lens is clear with mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, the world becomes a place of growth, beauty, and peace. You may not control every event, but you always control the way you see it. And in that choice lies the true power of your mind. the power to create a world of suffering or a world of liberation. The mind is both the prison and the key. If you look closely at your life, you will notice something fascinating. The moments that brought you the greatest suffering were not only about what happened, but about how your mind responded. Losing someone you love, failing at something important, or being rejected by others are all painful. But what truly magnifies the pain is the story the mind builds around it. It says, "This should not have happened. I will never be whole again. My life is ruined." These thoughts replay again and again, becoming chains that keep you locked inside suffering long after the original event has passed. In this way, the mind can become your prison, holding you captive in fear, regret, and despair. Yet the very same mind, when trained and understood, can become your greatest key to freedom. The difference lies not in the events of life, but in how you use the power of the mind itself. Buddhism teaches that the mind is both the source of suffering and the path to liberation. The untrained mind clings to desires, resists reality, and identifies with every passing thought. It is restless, reactive, and easily trapped by illusions, but the trained mind is steady, aware, and free from attachment. It can experience pain without being destroyed by it. It can face uncertainty without drowning in fear. It can walk through the world without being imprisoned by it. This is why the Buddha said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." Your mind can be a jailer or a liberator, depending on whether you master it or let it master you. To understand how the mind becomes a prison, think of a person who constantly worries about the future. Each day, their thoughts are filled with fear. What if I lose my job? What if I get sick? What if I fail? These are not events happening now, they are imagined possibilities. Yet their mind reacts as if the fears are real, flooding the body with stress and anxiety. The person cannot enjoy the present moment because their prison is built from fear of what has not even happened. Another person may live in the prison of the past, replaying old mistakes or betrayals. They may think, "If only I had done this differently. If only I had been stronger. If only they had not hurt me." These thoughts trap them in a world that no longer exists, preventing them from moving forward. In both cases, the bars of the prison are invisible, but they are strong enough to keep the person trapped. The key to escape lies in awareness. When you become aware of your thoughts, you begin to see the prison for what it is. You realize that fear of the future is only a thought, not a fact. You realize that regret about the past is only a memory, not the present reality. You realize that anger toward others is only energy in your mind, not an unchangeable truth. The moment you see this clearly, the bars of the prison weaken. You are no longer completely identified with the thoughts. You are the observer of them. And in that role, you discover the power to choose whether to believe them, whether to follow them, or whether to let them go. This is why meditation is such a powerful practice. In meditation, you sit quietly and notice the stream of thoughts flowing through your mind. Some are pleasant, others are painful, but the key is not to cling to them. You simply watch them rise and fall like clouds drifting across the sky. At first, this feels difficult because the mind is restless and demanding, but over time, you begin to see the pattern. Thoughts arise, thoughts fade, and none of them define who you are. You are not the prisoner trapped inside the thought. You are the awareness that exists beyond it. Once you taste this realization, even for a moment, you hold the key to freedom. The prison of the mind often feels real because of attachment. The mind clings to what it desires and resists what it dislikes. If you achieve something, the mind says, "Hold on to it forever." If you lose something, the mind says, "This should never have happened." In both cases, you are trapped because life itself is impermanent. Everything changes. When the mind refuses to accept this, it creates suffering. But when you learn to let go, when you allow joy and pain to come and go without clinging, you experience freedom. The key is not to stop feeling or caring, but to stop demanding that life be different than it is. Another way the mind becomes a prison is through identity. People cling to the idea of who they are. I am this kind of person. I am this role. I am defined by this success or this failure. When the role is taken away, when the success fades, when failure arrives, they feel destroyed because they believed their entire self was contained in that identity. But Buddhism teaches that the self is not fixed. It is fluid, changing with every moment, like a river that is never the same twice. When you realize this, you no longer cling to rigid identities. You become free to grow, to change, to evolve, because you are no longer imprisoned by a single story about who you are. Of course, liberation does not mean life becomes free of pain. Pain will always exist. Loss, illness, rejection, and failure are part of the human experience. But suffering, which is pain multiplied by resistance and negative thinking, can be reduced. Pain may strike you once, but your mind does not need to strike you again and again with stories about it. This is the Buddhist teaching of the two arrows. The first arrow is the inevitable pain of life. The second arrow is the suffering you create by saying, "This should not happen. I cannot bear this. My life is ruined." Liberation comes when you refuse to shoot yourself with that second arrow. You feel the pain, but you do not turn it into a prison. Think of how this changes daily life. Imagine someone insults you. Without mastery, your mind builds a prison of anger. How dare they? I must prove them wrong. I must hold on to this resentment. You suffer long after the insult has ended. But with awareness, you see the insult as words passing through air, reflecting the other person's state of mind, not your worth. The anger arises, but you do not cling to it. You let it go, and you remain free. Or imagine facing failure. Without mastery, your mind builds a prison of self-doubt. I am useless. I will never succeed. You stop trying, and the prison tightens. But with awareness, you see failure as a teacher, not a sentence. You feel the disappointment, but you also see the lesson. You rise again, and the prison dissolves. The truth is that everyone lives in some kind of mental prison until they learn to master their mind. For some, it is the prison of fear. For others, it is anger, regret, or attachment. But the key is always the same: awareness, mindfulness, and the ability to let go. When you develop these qualities, the mind itself transforms from a jailer into a guide. It stops trapping you in endless loops of suffering and instead becomes the tool through which you experience wisdom, compassion, and peace. This transformation does not happen overnight. At first, you may only notice small moments of freedom, catching yourself before reacting in anger, pausing before sinking into despair, choosing gratitude in the face of hardship. But these small moments are the cracks in the walls of the prison. With practice, the cracks widen until eventually the walls collapse. You realize you were never truly trapped. The prison was always an illusion created by thoughts, and the key was always in your hands. The most liberating realization of all is that freedom does not come from controlling life. It comes from mastering your relationship with your mind. You cannot stop the world from changing. You cannot stop loss, failure, or rejection. But you can stop your mind from turning these events into lifelong prisons. You can learn to let thoughts pass without becoming them. You can choose which thoughts to feed and which to release. You can remind yourself that you are not the storm, you are the sky beyond it. When you live this way, you discover a peace that no circumstance can take away. So remember this: your mind is both the prison and the key. If you live unconsciously, letting fear, anger, and doubt control you, you will remain trapped. But if you awaken, if you practice awareness, if you learn to choose your thoughts wisely and let go of clinging, you unlock the door. And once you step through, you realize that the freedom you were searching for has been within you all along, waiting for you to see it. The mind becomes what it repeats. If you want to understand why your life looks the way it does today, look closely at the thoughts you have been repeating every day. The mind is not a blank space where random ideas come and go without consequence. It is a living field, shaped and molded by repetition. Whatever you tell yourself over and over again becomes a pattern, and whatever pattern you feed long enough becomes your reality. Just as water, drop by drop, carves valleys through stone, repeated thoughts carve deep pathways in the mind, shaping the way you see yourself, the way you react to life, and the way you walk through the world. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like a wheel, always turning. Where it turns depends on the momentum you give it. If you repeatedly feed thoughts of fear, the wheel spins toward anxiety. If you repeatedly feed thoughts of anger, the wheel spins toward resentment. But if you feed thoughts of compassion, gratitude, and wisdom, the wheel turns toward peace. This is why the Buddha emphasized mindfulness, not as a passing practice but as a discipline of repetition. The mind, when left unattended, tends to repeat its old habits, like a river flowing in the path it has carved for centuries. But with awareness, you can redirect the flow, little by little, until a new path is formed. Think of someone who constantly repeats the thought, "I am not good enough." At first, it is just a thought, but with repetition, it becomes a belief. And once it becomes a belief, it begins to shape action. The person hesitates in opportunities, avoids risks, and interprets every setback as proof of their inadequacy. Over time, their life reflects the story they have been telling themselves. Another person might repeat the thought, "I am learning, I am capable of growth." At first it feels awkward, even forced, but with repetition it becomes a belief. That belief fuels confidence, which fuels action, which eventually creates success. The difference between the two lives is not intelligence, luck, or opportunity. It is the repeated patterns of thought that guided their choices. Science today supports this ancient truth. Neuroscience shows that the brain changes itself based on repetition, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. The more you repeat a thought, the stronger the neural connections become, making that thought easier to think again in the future. In simple terms, the brain is rewired by habit. If you constantly worry, your brain becomes wired for worry. If you constantly complain, your brain becomes wired to notice negativity. But if you practice gratitude daily, your brain becomes wired to notice blessings. If you practice kindness, your brain becomes wired to respond with compassion. The brain is always rewiring itself, and your repeated thoughts are the blueprint. This is why habits of mind are so powerful. They seem small in the moment, but they accumulate into the story of your life. Complaining once does not change much, but complaining every day for years creates a personality defined by bitterness. Practicing patience once feels insignificant, but practicing it daily for years creates a person who moves through life with grace and calm. Buddhism calls this the law of cause and effect, not in some mystical sense, but in the very practical reality of how repetition shapes character and destiny. So how do you take control of this process? The first step is awareness. Begin noticing which thoughts you repeat most often. Are they thoughts of fear, doubt, and anger, or are they thoughts of hope, gratitude, and courage? Be honest with yourself, because the truth may be uncomfortable. Many people want peace, but repeat thoughts of conflict. They want growth, but repeat thoughts of limitation. They want love, but repeat thoughts of bitterness. Once you see the pattern, you understand why your life feels the way it does. The outer experience is only the reflection of the inner repetition. The second step is intention. You cannot erase old patterns overnight, but you can begin creating new ones. Start by choosing a few thoughts that reflect the kind of life you want to live. For example, I am capable of growth. I choose peace over anger. I will face challenges with courage. Or, I am grateful for what I have. At first, these may feel unnatural, especially if your mind is used to repeating the opposite. But remember, the mind becomes what it repeats. The more you feed these thoughts, the stronger they become, until eventually they feel natural and the old patterns weaken. The third step is persistence. Repetition requires patience. Just as a river does not carve a new path in a single day, your mind will not change overnight. There will be moments when the old thoughts return, loud and convincing. But every time you return to the new pattern, you are carving a new path. Each repetition strengthens it, until one day the new thought becomes automatic. This is the real transformation, not forcing the mind in a moment, but patiently retraining it over time. Buddhism offers many practices for this retraining. Meditation is one, because it strengthens awareness and discipline. Mantras are another, because repeating a phrase of wisdom plants seeds in the subconscious. Mindful living is yet another, because it turns everyday actions into opportunities to practice new patterns. For example, when you wash the dishes, instead of repeating, "This is boring," you repeat, "This is a moment of peace." When you face traffic, instead of repeating, "This is unbearable," you repeat, "This is a chance to practice patience." These small repetitions accumulate, and over months and years, they reshape your mind, and with it, your life. Think of the greatest teachers, leaders, or compassionate people you admire. None of them became who they are by accident. They shaped their minds through repeated practice. A compassionate person has repeated compassion so often that it flows naturally. A wise person has repeated awareness so often that clarity becomes second nature. A disciplined person has repeated self-control so often that temptation no longer sways them. Their greatness is not luck. It is the product of repeated thoughts, practiced over time, until they became who they are. The danger lies in forgetting this truth and repeating the wrong patterns unconsciously. If you constantly repeat thoughts of anger, you become an angry person. If you constantly repeat thoughts of fear, you become a fearful person. If you constantly repeat thoughts of blame, you become a bitter person. None of this happens overnight. It happens drop by drop, repetition by repetition, until one day you look at your life and wonder why it feels heavy. The answer is simple. The mind became what it repeated. But the beauty of this truth is that change is always possible. No matter how long you have repeated negative patterns, you can begin again. The brain can always rewire, the mind can always be retrained, the story can always be rewritten. It may take time, but every new repetition is a step toward freedom. You are never too old, too broken, or too stuck to change the patterns of your mind. The moment you choose to repeat something new, the transformation begins. So ask yourself now, what am I repeating? What thoughts fill my mornings, my nights, my quiet moments? Are they building the life I want, or are they building the prison I fear? Remember, the mind does not care what it repeats. It will become whatever you feed it. That is both the danger and the power. The danger is that unconscious repetition builds suffering. The power is that conscious repetition builds liberation. In the end, the teaching is simple but profound. The mind becomes what it repeats. If you want peace, repeat peace. If you want courage, repeat courage. If you want wisdom, repeat wisdom. Do it daily, patiently, and persistently until it becomes who you are. Then one day, you will look at your life and realize that you are no longer the prisoner of old patterns. You are the master of new ones. And in that mastery, you will find the freedom, clarity, and joy that were waiting for you all along. Liberation through letting go of control. Everywhere you look, people are trying to control life. They try to control outcomes, control people, control the future, and even control the past by replaying it endlessly in their minds. This obsession with control feels natural because the mind believes that if it can shape everything perfectly, it will finally find peace. Yet, ironically, the more we try to control, the less peace we experience. Life does not bend to our demands. The future will always remain uncertain. Other people will act according to their own nature, not ours. Circumstances will shift beyond our ability to predict, and when the mind refuses to accept this, it lives in constant tension, clinging to what it wants, resisting what it dislikes, and fearing what it cannot change. In this way, control becomes a prison, and the key to freedom lies in letting go. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from attachment, the grasping desire for life to be different than it is. This attachment is another form of control. We want pleasure without pain, gain without loss, success without failure, and permanence in a world that is constantly changing. But reality does not work this way. Everything is impermanent. Health fades, seasons change, relationships evolve, fortunes rise and fall. When the mind clings to control, it resists this truth, and resistance creates suffering. The alternative is not passivity, but acceptance, letting go of control and aligning ourselves with the flow of life rather than fighting against it. Consider how often control has caused you suffering. Perhaps you tried to control a relationship, demanding that someone stay when their heart wanted to leave. The tighter you held on, the more pain you felt, because love cannot be controlled, it must be free to flourish. Or perhaps you tried to control your future, planning every detail, only to be thrown into chaos by unexpected events. The disappointment came not from the event itself, but from your attachment to a plan that life refused to follow. Or maybe you tried to control your own image, shaping how others see you, but the more you chased approval, the less authentic you felt. In every case, control turned into chains. When you let go of control, something remarkable happens. You discover a peace that does not depend on outcomes. You begin to act not from fear, but from wisdom. You still make choices, you still take responsibility, but you no longer demand that life obey your will. Instead, you move with life, like a sailor adjusting sails to the wind. The sailor cannot control the wind, but by working with it, he can still reach his destination. In the same way, you cannot control everything in life, but by letting go of resistance and working with reality, you find freedom and flow. Letting go of control does not mean giving up responsibility. It means shifting from attachment to acceptance. You still care, but you no longer cling. You still act, but you no longer demand guarantees. For example, in relationships, letting go does not mean abandoning love. It means loving without trying to own, appreciating without trying to possess. In work, letting go does not mean neglecting effort. It means giving your best while releasing attachment to results. In health, letting go does not mean ignoring your body. It means caring for it while accepting that impermanence is part of life. This balance of effort and release is the essence of liberation. Think of the way water flows. If you try to grasp it tightly in your fist, it slips away. But if you cup your hands gently, it rests there naturally. Life is the same. The harder you try to control it, the more it resists. But when you soften your grip, when you allow it to flow, it begins to nourish you. The paradox is that true influence in life comes not from control, but from alignment. Aligning yourself with the truth of impermanence, aligning with compassion, aligning with the present moment. Why does letting go bring such peace? Because it removes the constant conflict between your expectations and reality. When the mind insists, "This must not happen," and reality says, "But it has happened," suffering arises. When the mind says, "This must stay forever," and reality says, "Everything changes," suffering arises. But when the mind lets go and says, "This has happened, I accept it. This is changing, I allow it," peace arises. Acceptance does not erase pain, but it prevents pain from multiplying into suffering. It allows you to face life as it is, not as you demand it to be. Buddhism illustrates this with the teaching of the middle path. One extreme is clinging, holding too tightly, trying to control. The other extreme is indifference, abandoning effort, neglecting responsibility. The middle path is neither. It is caring deeply without attachment, acting wisely without control, and walking steadily without clinging to outcomes. In this path, you find balance. You live fully engaged with life, while free from the chains of control. In daily life, this practice begins with awareness. Notice when your mind is trying to control. Perhaps you are replaying conversations, wishing people had acted differently. Perhaps you are obsessing over the future, demanding certainty where none can exist. Perhaps you are criticizing yourself for past mistakes, trying to control what has already happened. In each case, pause and ask, what am I resisting? What am I trying to control that cannot be controlled? This awareness reveals the chains, and once you see them, you can begin to release them. The next step is trust. Letting go requires trust. Not blind faith, but trust in the flow of life, trust in your own resilience, trust that even if things do not go your way, you will still find a path forward. This trust is not naive. It is built from experience. You have already survived countless challenges. You have already adapted to countless changes. The evidence is within you. You are still here. Let that truth remind you that life does not need to be controlled in order for you to be safe, to grow, and to find meaning. Another practice is gratitude. Gratitude shifts your focus from what you lack to what you have, from what you cannot control to what is already present. When you cultivate gratitude, you loosen the grip of control because you no longer demand that life be different. You begin to appreciate life as it is. Gratitude transforms ordinary moments into treasures and reveals that peace is available not in controlling more, but in appreciating more. Over time, letting go of control transforms your entire way of being. Your relationships become lighter because you no longer burden them with unrealistic expectations. Your work becomes more fulfilling because you focus on the joy of effort rather than obsessing over results. Your mind becomes more peaceful because you stop fighting battles you cannot win. Life remains unpredictable, but unpredictability no longer frightens you. You walk with openness, ready to face whatever comes, knowing that your freedom does not depend on circumstances, but on your willingness to let go. Imagine a bird sitting on a branch. It does not cling to the branch in fear because it trusts its wings. If the branch breaks, it will fly. In the same way, letting go of control means trusting your wings, the resilience of your mind, the strength of your spirit, the wisdom of your awareness. Life may break the branch beneath you, but you can always fly. So remember this: control is an illusion, and clinging to it creates suffering. The mind that demands control lives in constant fear, because life will never obey perfectly. But the mind that lets go discovers freedom, because it no longer fights reality. Liberation is not about changing the world to fit your will. It is about changing your relationship to the world until you flow with it instead of resisting it. The prison was never life itself. The prison was always your insistence that life must obey you. The key is letting go. The mind finds peace only in the present moment. If you stop for a moment and watch your mind carefully, you will notice something astonishing. Most of the time it is not here. It is not in this room, not in this breath, not in this moment. Instead, it is wandering in two directions, backward into the past or forward into the future. It replays old mistakes, old hurts, old memories, again and again, as if reliving them could change them. Or it projects forward, spinning endless stories of what might happen, what could go wrong, what must be achieved. In this restless movement, the present moment is ignored, And yet, the present is the only place where peace, freedom, and life itself can truly be found. Buddhism teaches that the root of much of our suffering lies in this constant wandering of the mind. When the mind clings to the past, it is weighed down with regret, guilt, or longing. When the mind clings to the future, it is consumed by worry, fear, or endless desire. Neither the past nor the future exists in this moment. They are only thoughts, shadows of what was or what might be. But the mind mistakes them for reality, and in doing so, it suffers. True liberation comes when you train the mind to return again and again to the present moment. Here, in the simplicity of now, peace becomes possible. Think of the times when you have been truly at peace. Perhaps it was watching the sunset, when for a few minutes your mind stopped wandering and was simply present with the colors of the sky. Or perhaps it was holding the hand of someone you love, when the warmth of that connection filled you so fully that no thought of past or future was needed. In those moments, peace came not because life was perfect, but because your mind rested fully in the present. The moment you drifted back into regrets or forward into worries, the peace vanished. This is why the present moment is so powerful. It is the doorway to freedom, always open, always available, but often ignored. The mind resists this teaching because it is addicted to movement. It believes that by replaying the past, it will find closure, and by imagining the future, it will find safety. But this is an illusion. The past cannot be changed by replaying it, and the future cannot be secured by worrying about it. Both activities only rob you of the life that is happening now. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones of regret and fear. Each step becomes harder, not because the ground is difficult, but because of the weight you carry. When you learn to drop the backpack, when you stop clinging to past and future, the same path feels light and walkable. Nothing outside changed, but your experience transformed because your mind returned to the present. Buddhism offers the practice of mindfulness to cultivate this return. Mindfulness means paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment. It means noticing the breath as it flows in and out. It means feeling the ground beneath your feet as you walk. It means tasting your food fully instead of eating while lost in thought. It means listening to someone with your whole attention instead of planning your reply. These small acts of mindfulness are powerful because they anchor the wandering mind. They remind it that peace is not in yesterday or tomorrow. It is right here, in this simple act of living. Why is the present so liberating? Because it is the only place where suffering loses its grip. Regret is always about the past. Anxiety is always about the future. But in the pure awareness of now, those stories cannot survive. You may still feel pain, but you experience it directly without the added weight of, "This should not have happened," or "What if this never ends?" You may still face uncertainty, but you experience it as it is, without the added burden of, "I must control everything before I can be safe." In the present, pain becomes manageable, fear becomes smaller, and joy becomes more vivid. This does not mean you never think of the past or the future. The mind has the gift of memory and imagination for a reason. The past can teach us, and the future can guide us. But suffering begins when the mind becomes trapped there, unable to return. Using the past as a teacher is different from being imprisoned by it. Planning for the future is different from living in fear of it. Mindfulness helps you make this distinction. It teaches you to use memory and imagination wisely, but always to return home to the present, where life is truly lived. Consider how this shift changes daily life. Imagine someone stuck in traffic. An untrained mind will wander into frustration. Why is this happening to me? I will be late. Everything is ruined. The body fills with tension and suffering multiplies. But a mindful mind notices the breath, notices the hands on the steering wheel, notices the chance to pause in the rush of the day. The traffic remains, but the suffering does not. Or imagine someone facing illness. An untrained mind leaps into fear. What if I never recover? What if my future is destroyed? The suffering becomes overwhelming, but a mindful mind focuses on this moment. Right now, I am breathing. Right now, I am alive. This awareness does not erase pain, but it prevents pain from becoming despair. The more you practice mindfulness, the more you realize that the present moment is not small or ordinary, it is vast and full of life. Every breath contains a miracle. Every step on the earth is a gift. Every sound, every sight, every touch is alive with presence. The problem is not that life lacks wonder, it is that the wandering mind misses it. When you train the mind to stay present, you discover that peace, joy, and freedom were never far away. They were always here, hidden beneath layers of distraction. Buddhism calls this realization awakening, because it is like waking from a dream. Most people live as if asleep, lost in thoughts of past and future, missing the reality unfolding before them. Awakening is simply opening your eyes to the present moment. It does not require years of study or complicated rituals. It requires attention, patience, and practice. Each time you bring your mind back to now, you awaken a little more. Each time you let go of the stories and rest in awareness, you taste freedom. Over time, the practice of presence transforms your entire being. Your relationships deepen because you truly listen. Your work improves because you focus fully on the task. Your joy increases because you savor small moments. Even your suffering changes because you meet it directly instead of magnifying it with stories. Life does not need to be perfect for you to experience peace. It only requires that your mind rest where life is happening, in the present. Imagine standing on a riverbank. The river is time, flowing endlessly. The past is upstream, already gone. The future is downstream, not yet arrived. You can spend your whole life looking upstream or downstream, longing for what has passed or fearing what may come. But peace is found only when you place your feet firmly on the ground and feel the flow of water in this moment. You cannot stop the river, but you can stop losing yourself in it. You can be present here and now. So remember this: the mind finds peace only in the present moment. The past is a memory, the future is a dream, but the present is real. Train your mind to return again and again to this moment, and you will discover a freedom that cannot be taken away. No matter what storms rage around you, the calm center is always here, waiting for you to rest in it. The key is not in changing life, but in changing where your mind chooses to live. When it lives in the present, you are free. The mind creates chains through desire and finds freedom through contentment. If you look closely at the nature of the human mind, you will see a constant movement of wanting. It wants more of what it likes and less of what it dislikes. It is always chasing, always resisting, always grasping for something just out of reach. The Buddha taught that this restless desire is the root of suffering. As long as the mind is trapped in craving, it will never know peace. Even when it gets what it wants, it clings in fear of losing it. Even when it avoids what it dislikes, it lives in dread that it might return. In this way, desire becomes a chain, binding the mind to endless cycles of dissatisfaction. Yet the very same mind, when trained in contentment, discovers freedom. For when you learn to be at ease with what you have, when you stop demanding that life always give you more, the chains fall away and peace arises naturally. Desire by itself is not evil, it is simply part of the mind's nature. Desire fuels survival, the desire to eat, the desire to rest, the desire to find safety. Without it, life would not continue. But unchecked desire without awareness, becomes greed, obsession, and addiction. It convinces the mind that happiness lies always in the next thing, in the next purchase, the next achievement, the next relationship, the next success. Yet the moment you reach it, the mind simply demands more. It is like drinking salty water to quench thirst. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. This is why people can achieve great success, wealth, or recognition and still feel empty. Their outer lives are full, but their inner minds are still craving, still unsatisfied. Think of someone who spends their whole life chasing wealth. They believe, if I just make enough money, I will finally be at peace. But when the money comes, the peace does not. Now they worry about losing it, or they want even more. Or think of someone who chases love obsessively, believing, if I can just find the perfect partner, all my loneliness will disappear. But when they find someone, they cling so tightly that fear of loss poisons the relationship. Or think of someone who endlessly chases success, believing, if I can just reach this goal, I will finally feel worthy. But once the goal is reached, they set another, never satisfied, never at rest. In each case, desire was the chain. It promised freedom, but delivered more bondage. Buddhism calls this cycle tanha, craving. Craving is not just wanting, it is the restless belief that happiness exists only in what is not yet here. Craving blinds the mind, keeping it always in a state of reaching, never resting. And the tragedy is that even when craving is fulfilled, it produces not peace, but fear. Fear of losing what has been gained. This is why the Buddha compared craving to fire. It burns endlessly, consuming everything, leaving the mind scorched and restless. To escape this fire, one must learn the art of contentment. Contentment does not mean you never strive, never grow, or never dream. It does not mean you abandon your goals or desires. It means that you stop making your peace dependent on them. You can still pursue success, but you are not destroyed if you fail. You can still love deeply, but you do not cling in fear. You can still enjoy pleasures, but you do not depend on them for happiness. Contentment means resting in the present moment, grateful for what is, even as you work toward what may come. It is a shift from "I will be happy when" to "I can be at peace now." Imagine sitting under a tree with a cup of tea. The untrained mind says, "This is nice, but I wish I had more. Better tea, a bigger house, a different life." Contentment says, "This moment is enough. I can drink this tea fully, enjoy this tree's shade, and be at peace right here." One mind creates chains of craving, the other finds freedom in presence. The outer scene is the same, but the inner experience is completely different. Contentment is powerful because it breaks the cycle of endless wanting. When you practice gratitude, you train the mind to see what is already here instead of obsessing over what is missing. When you practice acceptance, you release the need to fight reality and instead flow with it. When you practice simplicity, you free yourself from the clutter of endless desires and discover joy in the ordinary. These practices do not make life dull. They make life more vivid because you are finally awake to what is right in front of you. Think of how this changes daily living. A person trapped in desire eats a meal quickly, barely tasting it, already thinking about what they will eat next. A person rooted in contentment eats slowly, savoring each bite, grateful for the nourishment. A person trapped in desire rushes through their day, driven by goals, always waiting for the future. A person rooted in contentment moves with calm, present with each step, finding joy in small moments. A person trapped in desire clings to people, fearing abandonment. A person rooted in contentment loves freely, without fear, because their peace does not depend on control. The difference is not in circumstances, it is in the mind's relationship to desire. Why does contentment bring such deep freedom? Because it dissolves the illusion that happiness lies outside of you. It reveals that peace is not in the next possession, the next achievement, or the next moment. It is in how you meet this moment. Contentment teaches you that nothing is missing, even when life is imperfect. You can still improve, still grow, but you do not postpone peace until everything is perfect. You live fully now while walking toward the future. This truth is echoed in the story of the Buddha's enlightenment. Before awakening, the Buddha lived both extremes, indulgence in pleasure as a prince and denial of pleasure as an ascetic. Neither brought peace. Only when he sat under the Bodhi tree, letting go of craving and resting fully in the present, did enlightenment arise. His realization was not that life must be perfect, but that the mind must let go of its endless grasping. In letting go, he found freedom. But how can you practice this in your own life? The first step is noticing desire. Each day, observe your mind. When it says, "I cannot be happy until," pause and recognize that as craving. When it says, "If only I had this, then I would be at peace," see the chain being formed. This awareness alone begins to weaken desire's grip. The second step is gratitude. Make it a daily practice to reflect on what you already have. The food you eat, the shelter you rest in, the people who care for you, these are not small things. Gratitude transforms ordinary life into treasure. It reminds the mind that joy does not come from what is missing, but from what is already present. The third step is mindfulness. Learn to experience each moment fully without rushing past it. When you drink water, taste it completely. When you walk, feel each step. When you breathe, notice the breath. Mindfulness interrupts craving by anchoring you in what is real, here and now. The fourth step is generosity. Desire is rooted in self. I want, I need, I must have. Generosity breaks this cycle by turning the mind outward. When you give to others, you weaken the chains of greed and discover a joy deeper than possession, the joy of connection, compassion, and love. Over time, these practices reshape the mind. Desire loses its grip, and contentment becomes your natural state. You begin to see that freedom is not in getting everything you want, but in no longer needing everything. You discover that peace does not come from controlling life, but from flowing with it. You realize that happiness is not found in the next moment, but in this one. Imagine the difference. The person trapped in desire is like a prisoner running after mirages, always thirsty, never satisfied. The person rooted in contentment is like a free traveler, drinking deeply from each stream, grateful for each step, moving lightly through the world. Both walk the same earth, but their inner worlds are worlds apart. So remember this: the mind creates chains through desire and finds freedom through contentment. If you live always in craving, you will remain restless, no matter how much you gain. But if you cultivate contentment, you will be free, no matter what you lack. Peace is not in the next possession, the next success, or the next day. It is here, now, waiting for you to let go and rest in what already is. 17. The mind is restless until it learns stillness. If there is one thing that defines the untrained human mind, it is restlessness. Even in quiet moments, when there is nothing urgent to do, the mind does not rest. It leaps from one thought to another, planning, worrying, remembering, judging. You sit in silence, but the mind is loud. You lie in bed, but the mind is awake. You take a walk, but the mind is already somewhere else. This restlessness is so common that most people mistake it for normal life. They assume the constant noise of the mind is inevitable, that peace is something to be found only outside themselves, through entertainment, achievement, or distraction. But Buddhism teaches that this restlessness is not inevitable. It is simply the result of an untrained mind. And just as a wild horse can be trained to move with grace, the mind can be trained to rest in stillness. The Buddha often compared the restless mind to a monkey, jumping from branch to branch, never still, never satisfied. This monkey mind is always searching for something, something to chase, something to avoid, something to cling to. Left unchecked, it drags us into endless cycles of suffering. When the mind is restless, even small problems feel overwhelming because the mind multiplies them with stories and fears. When the mind is restless, even blessings feel insufficient because the mind rushes past them in search of more. Restlessness keeps us trapped in discontent, never fully present, never truly at peace. But why is the mind so restless? Because it is addicted to movement. Thoughts are its way of feeling alive, of filling the silence it does not understand. The mind fears stillness because stillness reveals truths it would rather avoid, that everything is impermanent, that control is an illusion, that clinging leads to suffering. So it keeps moving, endlessly distracting itself with thoughts, desires, and worries. In this way, restlessness becomes not just a habit, but a defense mechanism. Yet beneath the noise, there is a deeper part of us that longs for peace. This longing is what draws people to meditation, to prayer, to silence. Deep down, we know that restlessness is not our true nature, that stillness is. Stillness does not mean the absence of thought. Thoughts will always arise, just as clouds always drift through the sky. Stillness means not being carried away by them. It means resting in the awareness behind the thoughts, the vast sky that remains unchanged no matter how many clouds pass through. This is why meditation is not about forcing the mind to stop thinking, but about learning to rest in the space between thoughts, to observe without clinging, to remain still even while the mind continues its dance. Over time, the restlessness softens and a deeper peace emerges. Think of a glass of muddy water. If you keep stirring it, the water remains cloudy. But if you set the glass down, the mud settles and the water becomes clear. The restless mind is the same. Constant thinking stirs up confusion, making it impossible to see clearly. But when you allow the mind to rest, when you stop feeding every thought, clarity naturally arises. You see things as they are, not as your restless stories painted them. Problems that once felt insurmountable become manageable. Emotions that once felt overwhelming lose their grip. Stillness reveals the truth hidden beneath the noise. The practice of cultivating stillness begins with awareness. Most people do not even notice their restlessness. They are too busy being carried by it. So the first step is to simply observe. Sit quietly for a few minutes and notice how the mind jumps from one thought to another. Watch it plan, judge, remember, imagine. Do not fight it. Do not cling to it. Just observe. In this observation, you begin to see the restless mind for what it is. A habit, not a truth. The second step is to return. Choose an anchor for your attention, such as the breath, the sensation of the body, or a simple mantra. Each time the mind wanders, gently bring it back. At first, it will wander every second, and you may feel discouraged. But this is not failure, this is training. Each return is like lifting a weight for the mind, strengthening its ability to rest. Over time, the mind wanders less, and the moments of stillness grow longer. The third step is patience. Restlessness has been built over years, even decades. You cannot dissolve it overnight. Just as a wild animal takes time to trust its trainer, the mind takes time to trust stillness. But with gentle persistence, it learns. Each day, even a few minutes of practice builds strength, and slowly, the restless monkey mind transforms into a steady, calm presence. Stillness does not mean withdrawal from life. In fact, it makes life richer. When the mind is restless, you miss the present moment. You eat but do not taste. You walk but do not notice. You talk but do not listen. But when the mind is still, You are fully alive. You savor the food, you feel the ground beneath your feet, you hear the words of others deeply. Life becomes vivid, not because it changed, but because your restless mind stopped racing past it. Stillness also brings wisdom. The restless mind is reactive. It jumps to conclusions, acts on impulse, and magnifies problems. But the still mind sees clearly. It does not rush to react. It responds with wisdom. Imagine someone insults you. A restless mind immediately reacts with anger, replaying the insult, plotting revenge. A still mind pauses, observes the hurt, and responds with calm. It may speak firmly, or it may choose silence, but it does so with clarity, not impulse. This is the power of stillness. It gives you space to act wisely instead of reacting blindly. Another gift of stillness is compassion. When the mind is restless, it is consumed by its own stories, its fears, its desires, its judgments. There is little space for others, but when the mind becomes still, the noise quiets and the heart opens. You begin to see others more clearly, to feel their struggles, to respond with kindness. This is why monks and meditators often radiate peace and compassion. Their stillness has freed them from self-obsession, allowing them to connect with others deeply. Yet perhaps the greatest gift of stillness is freedom from fear. The restless mind constantly imagines dangers. What if I fail? What if I am rejected? What if I lose everything? These fears keep us chained, preventing us from living fully. But in stillness, you see that fear is only a thought, not reality. You realize that in this moment, you are safe. The future is uncertain, yes, but you do not need to carry its weight now. This realization frees you to live with courage, to face challenges without being paralyzed by anxiety. Of course, cultivating stillness does not mean you never feel restless again. Restlessness will always arise. It is part of the human condition. But mastery means it no longer controls you. You see it, you smile at it, and you return to stillness. Over time, restlessness becomes like a passing breeze. It may stir the surface, but it cannot shake your foundation. Think of the ocean. On the surface, waves are restless, rising and falling with the wind. But in the depths, the ocean is calm, unmoved. Your mind is the same. Restlessness may stir the surface, but beneath it lies a vast stillness. Most people live only on the surface, tossed by every wave. But when you train the mind, you sink into the depths, where peace is unshaken. This depth is always within you, waiting to be discovered. So how can you begin living with more stillness in daily life? Start small. Take moments each day to pause. Breathe deeply before speaking. Walk slowly and feel each step. Eat without distraction, tasting each bite. These small acts of mindfulness bring stillness into ordinary life. Over time, they accumulate, creating a life that feels spacious, peaceful, and free. The restless mind is a prison because it never lets you rest. It always demands more thoughts, more control, more certainty. But the still mind is liberation because it allows you to simply be. In stillness, you realize you do not need to chase the future or fix the past. You only need to rest in this moment. Here, now, in the simplicity of being, you discover a peace deeper than anything desire can offer. So remember this: the mind is restless until it learns stillness. Restlessness will always promise fulfillment in the next thought, the next plan, the next desire. But true peace is found only when you stop running and rest in the present. Stillness is not emptiness, it is fullness, the fullness of being alive in this very moment. And when you taste it, even for a breath, you will know this is the freedom you have been searching for all along. The mind is a mirror. It reflects what you place before it. Imagine holding a mirror in your hand. Whatever you place before it, flowers, mountains, a candle, or shadows, it reflects faithfully. The mirror itself does not choose what it shows. It simply reveals what stands before it. In the same way, your mind is a mirror. It reflects the thoughts, images, and beliefs you feed it. If you constantly place fear before it, it will reflect fear. If you place anger, it will reflect anger. If you place compassion and gratitude, it will reflect peace and joy. The tragedy is that most people do not realize this. They complain about what their mind reflects while continually placing negativity before it. They wonder why their inner world feels heavy while feeding it with images of worry, doubt, and resentment. But the truth is simple. Your mind cannot reflect anything other than what you place before it. Buddhism emphasizes this truth in the teaching of right view, the understanding that the mind shapes reality by the way it perceives and interprets experience. Your outer world may contain both beauty and pain, but what dominates your inner world depends on what you focus on. Just as a mirror reflects what stands before it, the mind reflects what you continually place at the center of your attention. This is why two people can live in the same circumstances yet experience completely different realities. One chooses to focus on problems and their mind reflects despair. The other chooses to focus on opportunities and their mind reflects hope. Life did not change. The mirror simply reflected what each placed before it. Think of someone who spends hours each day watching negative news, gossiping, or dwelling on grievances. They may not notice it immediately, but their mind slowly fills with fear, suspicion, and bitterness. The mirror reflects what they have placed before it. Now think of someone who spends time each day in meditation, gratitude, and acts of kindness. Their mind reflects peace, resilience, and compassion. The outer world may still be chaotic, but their inner reflection is different because they place different things before the mirror. This is the power of attention. Whatever you give it to becomes the image your mind reflects. The problem is that the mind, left untrained, often reflects the worst. It is naturally drawn to fear and negativity because from an evolutionary perspective, noticing danger helped our ancestors survive. But survival is not the same as peace. If you let the mind reflect only fear, you will live in a constant state of anxiety, even when no danger exists. The key is not to eliminate the mirror, it cannot be eliminated, but to consciously choose what you place before it. This choice, repeated daily, transforms the mind from a source of suffering into a source of peace. Consider how this works in relationships. If you constantly reflect on a partner's flaws, your mind will be filled with frustration and the relationship will feel unbearable. But if you reflect on their kindness, their efforts, and their humanity, your mind will be filled with appreciation and the relationship will feel nourishing. The partner may not have changed. The reflection changed because you placed something different before the mirror. In work, if you focus only on obstacles, your mind will reflect discouragement. But if you focus on possibilities, your mind will reflect determination. The outer world remains the same, but the inner reflection determines whether you live in despair or in hope. This truth also applies to how you see yourself. If you constantly feed your mind with self-criticism, I am not good enough, I always fail, I am unworthy, your mind will reflect those images back to you, and you will live as if they are true. But if you feed your mind with self-compassion, I am learning, I am growing, I am worthy of love, your mind will reflect that back, and your actions will align with confidence and peace. The self you experience is not fixed. It is the reflection your mind shows you, shaped by what you place before it. Buddhism uses the metaphor of the lotus to illustrate this. The lotus grows from muddy water, yet it rises above the surface to bloom in purity and beauty. The mud is life's challenges, pain, loss, impermanence. But what matters is not the mud itself, it is what the mind reflects. If you place only the mud before the mirror, you see only suffering. But if you place the lotus, the possibility of growth, the lesson in the pain. The mirror reflects beauty. The outer mud remains, but your inner world becomes radiant. This is why the Buddha taught that liberation is not about escaping life's difficulties, but about changing the way the mind reflects them. So how do you begin to purify the mirror of the mind? The first step is mindfulness. Notice what you are placing before the mirror each day. Are you constantly feeding it with worry, anger, and negativity? Or are you feeding it with gratitude, compassion, and presence? Awareness is the beginning of choice. Once you see what you are doing, you can begin to choose differently. The second step is intentional focus. Just as a photographer chooses what to frame in a picture, you can choose what to frame in your mind. This does not mean denying difficulties. It means not giving them all your attention. For example, when faced with a challenge, you can focus on the opportunity to learn instead of only on the pain. When dealing with a difficult person, you can focus on practicing patience instead of only on their flaws. By choosing your focus, you change the reflection. The third step is daily practice. The mirror becomes clear not through a single act, but through consistent effort. Gratitude, journaling, meditation, and acts of kindness are not just practices for the moment. They are ways of repeatedly placing peace, compassion, and clarity before the mirror. Over time, these practices shape the reflection until they become your natural way of being. One of the most powerful practices in Buddhism is loving-kindness meditation, metta. In this practice, you repeat phrases of goodwill toward yourself and others. May I be happy. May I be safe. May I live with ease. May all beings be happy. May all beings live in peace. At first, these may feel like mere words, but with repetition, they place compassion before the mirror, and slowly the mind begins to reflect that compassion naturally. You find yourself responding with more patience, more kindness, more understanding, not because the outer world changed, but because the reflection inside you changed. Science supports this as well. Studies show that practices like gratitude and meditation literally rewire the brain, strengthening neural pathways associated with positivity and weakening those associated with negativity. In other words, the brain reflects what it is trained to reflect. What Buddhism has taught for centuries, that the mind is a mirror. Modern science now confirms through research. Over time, this practice of choosing what to place before the mirror brings deep freedom. You realize that you are not powerless before circumstances. Pain, loss, and challenges will come, but they do not have to dominate your inner world. You may face storms, but you can choose whether your mirror reflects only the storm or also the rainbow that follows. You may live in difficulty, but you can choose whether your mirror reflects only despair or also resilience. The outer world may be beyond your control, but the inner reflection is always within your reach. Imagine two people standing in the rain. One focuses only on the cold, the discomfort, the inconvenience. Their mirror reflects misery. The other notices the freshness of the air, the sound of raindrops, the way the earth is nourished. Their mirror reflects wonder. Both are wet, both are in the same storm, but their inner worlds are entirely different. This is the power of the mind as a mirror. It creates the world you live in by what it reflects. So remember this. The mind is a mirror, and it reflects what you place before it. If you want peace, place peace before it. If you want compassion, place compassion before it. If you want clarity, place clarity before it. Do not complain about the reflection while continually feeding it negativity. Choose wisely what you place in front of your mind, and over time, the reflection will transform your entire life. The mind is shaped by habits, and habits shape your life. If you want to know who you will become in the future, you do not need to consult the stars or search for hidden signs. All you need to do is look at your habits today. Every thought you repeat, every action you perform, every reaction you allow is shaping the mind, and with it, the path of your life. Habits may seem small in the moment, a repeated complaint, a moment of gratitude, a quick judgment, a deep breath, but over time they carve grooves into the mind. These grooves become automatic patterns, and these patterns become destiny. The Buddha taught that the mind is conditioned, and this conditioning happens through habit. What you practice grows stronger. If you practice anger, anger becomes natural. If you practice patience, patience becomes natural. In this way, your mind is always training itself, whether you realize it or not. The tragedy is that most people do not realize how much power lies in these small habits. They imagine that transformation requires something grand, some sudden breakthrough, some extraordinary event. But in truth, transformation is the slow accumulation of choices made daily. Just as a river shapes a valley not in a day but over centuries, your habits shape your mind slowly, steadily, but inevitably. The life you live now is the result of habits you have built. And the life you will live tomorrow will be the result of the habits you practice today. Think of the habit of worry. A person may begin worrying occasionally, thinking it helps them prepare for the future. But over time, worry becomes their default state. The mind, conditioned to look for danger, begins to imagine problems even where none exist. Soon, worry colors their relationships, their work, their health. They live not in reality, but in a world of imagined fears. All of this began with a habit, a thought repeated until it became automatic. Now think of the habit of gratitude. At first it may feel awkward to pause each day and reflect on blessings. But with practice, gratitude becomes natural. The mind, conditioned to notice goodness, begins to find it everywhere, in small moments, in challenges, even in pain. This person lives in the same world as the worrier, but their experience is entirely different because their habits have shaped their mind in a different way. Buddhism emphasizes the law of cause and effect. Every action, every word, every thought is a cause that creates an effect. Habits are simply causes repeated so often that their effects become ingrained. If you repeatedly sow seeds of anger, you will live in a field of conflict. If you repeatedly sow seeds of compassion, you will live in a field of peace. The mind does not discriminate. It will grow whatever seeds you plant in it. This is why mindfulness is essential. Without awareness, you may be planting seeds of suffering every day without realizing it. With awareness, you can choose to plant seeds of wisdom and liberation. Consider how habits shape relationships. If you repeatedly criticize, even lightly, you create a pattern of negativity. Over time, it erodes trust and closeness. But if you repeatedly show appreciation, even in small ways, you create a pattern of love and respect. In work, if you habitually procrastinate, you create stress and missed opportunities. But if you habitually take small steps forward, you create momentum and success. In health, if you habitually ignore your body, you create illness. But if you habitually care for it, you create vitality. In every area of life, habits are quietly building your future. The good news is that habits can be changed. The mind is not fixed. It is plastic, able to be reshaped through practice. This is why Buddhism emphasizes practice. Meditation, mindfulness, compassion. These are not one-time acts. They are habits to be cultivated daily. Each time you return to the breath in meditation, you strengthen the habit of awareness. Each time you respond with kindness instead of anger, you strengthen the habit of compassion. Each time you let go instead of clinging, you strengthen the habit of freedom. Over time, these habits reshape the mind until wisdom and peace become natural states. Changing habits begins with small steps. The mind resists big changes because they feel overwhelming, but small, consistent actions bypass resistance and build momentum. For example, if you want to cultivate mindfulness, begin with a single mindful breath each morning. If you want to cultivate gratitude, begin with a single reflection each night. If you want to cultivate patience, begin with a single pause before reacting. Each small act may seem insignificant, but repeated daily, it becomes powerful. Just as drops of water can wear away stone, small habits can transform even the most restless mind. The challenge is that old habits are deeply ingrained. The mind will return to them automatically because they have been practiced for years. This is why persistence is so important. Each time you fall back into an old habit, do not see it as failure. See it as an opportunity to practice returning. Each return strengthens the new path. Over time, the old groove fades and the new groove deepens. This is how transformation happens, not by erasing the past instantly, but by patiently carving a new path, step by step. One of the most effective ways to change habits is through mindfulness in daily life. Most habits are unconscious. You react before you even realize what you're doing. But mindfulness interrupts this cycle. When you notice the urge to complain, you pause and choose gratitude. When you notice the urge to lash out, you pause and choose calm. When you notice the urge to cling, you pause and choose release. Each pause is a victory, because it replaces unconscious habit with conscious choice. Over time, these pauses accumulate, reshaping the mind. Science confirms this as well. Neuroscience shows that habits are formed through repetition, creating neural pathways that become stronger the more they are used. Breaking a habit means weakening the old pathway by not using it, while building a new habit means strengthening a new pathway through repetition. This aligns perfectly with Buddhist teaching. What you practice grows stronger. If you practice fear, fear grows. If you practice peace, peace grows. The brain reflects the law of the mind. Your habits create your reality. But habits are not only about actions, they are also about identity. Each habit is a vote for the kind of person you become. When you meditate, you are not just sitting quietly, you are casting a vote for being a mindful person. When you act with kindness, you are not just helping someone, you are casting a vote for being a compassionate person. Over time, these votes accumulate until they shape your sense of self. You do not need to force a new identity, you simply live it through habits. So ask yourself, what habits am I practicing daily? Are they shaping me into the person I want to be, or are they strengthening the patterns I want to leave behind? Do my habits reflect fear or courage, selfishness or compassion, distraction or presence? The answer will reveal not only who you are now, but who you are becoming. Buddhism teaches that liberation is the ultimate habit, the habit of awareness, the habit of compassion, the habit of letting go. When these become natural, suffering fades, not because life is perfect, but because the mind has been trained to meet it with wisdom. Liberation is not a single act. It is the culmination of countless small habits practiced daily until they transform the mind completely. Imagine two paths in a forest. One path is well-worn, easy to walk, but it leads to a place of suffering. The other is narrow, difficult, but it leads to freedom. Each step you take is a habit. At first, it feels easier to take the old path because it is familiar, but each time you choose the new path, it becomes clearer, easier to walk. Eventually, the old path grows over with weeds, and the new path becomes your natural way. This is how habits reshape your life, not through one grand leap, but through many small steps taken again and again. So remember this: the mind is shaped by habits, and habits shape your life. If you want to change your life, change your habits. If you want peace, practice peace. If you want freedom, practice letting go. If you want wisdom, practice awareness. Every small act matters because every act is a seed planted in the mind. Over time, the seeds you water will grow, and the harvest will be your destiny. The mind suffers in illusion, but finds freedom in truth. If you look carefully at the nature of your suffering, you will discover something profound. Much of it does not come from reality itself, but from illusions created by the mind. Reality is what is happening here and now. Your breath, your body, the sights and sounds around you. Illusion is the story the mind builds on top of reality. It says, "This should not have happened. This always happens to me. I will never recover. I must be in control. I cannot be happy unless..." These are not truths. They are illusions, projections of the mind. And yet when you believe them, they feel as real as the ground beneath your feet. The mind suffers not because of life itself, but because of the illusions it clings to. The path to freedom begins when you learn to see through these illusions and rest in truth. Buddhism teaches that ignorance, avidya, not knowing the truth of reality, is the root of suffering. Ignorance here does not mean stupidity, it means mistaking illusions for truth. We believe the self is fixed and unchanging, when in fact it is fluid and impermanent. We believe possessions will bring permanent happiness, when in fact they are temporary and unsatisfying. We believe we can control life, when in fact life is ever-changing and beyond our control. These illusions create endless clinging and resistance create suffering. Truth, by contrast, brings liberation. When you see reality clearly, without illusion, you stop fighting what cannot be changed and stop chasing what cannot satisfy. You live in harmony with life as it is, and in that harmony you find peace. Consider the illusion of permanence. The mind wants to believe that people, possessions, and experiences will last forever, but everything changes. Youth fades, relationships shift, fortunes rise and fall, even the body itself grows old and eventually dies. When the mind clings to permanence, it suffers at every change, as if something unnatural has occurred. But when you see the truth of impermanence, you accept change as natural. You grieve loss, but you do not fight it. You enjoy blessings, but you do not cling to them. This acceptance transforms suffering into wisdom. Instead of asking, "How do I keep this forever?" you ask, "How do I live fully while it is here?" Another illusion is the belief in a fixed self. We say, "This is who I am. I will always be this way. I cannot change." But the truth is that the self is not a solid object. It is a process, constantly changing. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago or even yesterday. Your thoughts, emotions, and habits shift with each moment. Clinging to a fixed identity creates suffering because life constantly challenges it. You may think, "I am successful," and when failure comes, you feel destroyed. You may think, "I am strong," and when illness comes, you feel broken. But when you see the truth, that the self is impermanent, you stop clinging to identity and begin to live more freely. You are no longer trapped by who you think you must be. You can grow, adapt, and transform. A third illusion is the belief that possessions and achievements will bring lasting happiness. The mind says, "If I just get this job, this house, this partner, this recognition, I will finally be happy." But when you achieve it, the happiness fades, and the mind demands more. This is not because you are broken. It is because the mind is chasing illusions. Happiness built on external things cannot last, because external things are impermanent. The truth is that peace does not come from outside. It comes from within, from your relationship to the present moment. When you see this, you stop chasing endlessly and begin to cultivate joy in the simple fact of being alive. Illusion also arises in the form of stories the mind tells about events. Two people may face the same difficulty, but one suffers more because of the story they tell. Imagine losing a job. One person says, "This means I am worthless. I will never succeed. My life is ruined." This story multiplies their suffering. Another person says, "This is painful, but it is an opportunity to grow, to find a new path." This story transforms the same event into growth. Reality was the same. the loss of a job, but the illusion of the first story created suffering, while the clarity of the second story created resilience. This is why the Buddha taught, "We are what we think." All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The mind's illusions create your world of suffering, while truth creates your world of freedom. So how do you begin to dissolve illusions and see truth? The first step is mindfulness. Pay attention to your thoughts and notice when they are adding stories to reality. For example, pain arises in the body. The truth is, there is pain. The illusion is, this pain means my life is ruined. I cannot bear it. I will never be happy again. When you separate truth from illusion, the suffering lessens. Pain remains, but it is just pain, not a lifelong prison. The second step is questioning. When a thought arises, ask, is this true? Is this reality, or is it a story my mind is creating? For example, when you think, nobody cares about me, pause and ask, is that true? Or is it an illusion created by hurt? You may remember people who do care, and the illusion weakens. This questioning does not mean rejecting all thoughts. It means testing them against reality. Truth survives questioning. Illusion crumbles. The third step is letting go. Once you see that a thought is an illusion, you do not need to fight it. You simply let it pass. Illusions thrive on clinging. When you stop clinging, they dissolve naturally. Imagine a cloud drifting across the sky. If you cling to it, you suffer when it changes shape. But if you let it pass, the sky remains clear. The same is true with illusions of the mind. The fourth step is cultivating wisdom. Wisdom arises from repeated practice, seeing through illusions again and again until the truth becomes clear. Over time, you stop falling for the mind's tricks. You see impermanence not as a tragedy, but as the nature of life. You see the self not as fixed, but as fluid and adaptable. You see possessions not as salvation, but as tools. You see that peace does not come from controlling life, but from living in harmony with its flow. This wisdom becomes your foundation, and illusions lose their power to enslave you. One of the most powerful truths in Buddhism is that freedom does not come from escaping life, but from seeing it clearly. Illusions make life heavier than it is. Truth lightens the load. Illusions create chains of clinging and fear. Truth cuts the chains. Illusions blind you with false promises. Truth opens your eyes to what has always been here, the peace of the present moment. Imagine living without illusions. You would still face challenges, but you would not multiply them with stories of despair. You would still experience joy, but you would not cling to it desperately. You would still love deeply, but without fear of loss consuming you. You would walk through life with clarity, meeting each moment as it is, not as your illusions demand it to be. This is what liberation looks like. Not a life without pain, but a life without unnecessary suffering. So remember this, the mind suffers in illusion, but finds freedom in truth. Illusion will always whisper, you will only be happy when you are nothing without. This must last forever. But truth whispers something different. Happiness is here within you. You are not fixed. You are free to grow. Everything changes, and that is why life is precious. When you live in truth, the illusions lose their grip and peace arises naturally. The world outside may remain uncertain, but your inner world becomes free, because it rests not on illusions, but on the solid ground of truth. The mind is the master of reaction, and reaction decides your destiny. Every day, life presents you with situations you cannot control. Someone cuts you off in traffic. A colleague speaks harshly. A friend disappoints you. Plans fall apart. Illness strikes. The rain comes when you hoped for sunshine. These events are often beyond your power to change. But there is one thing that is always within your power: how you react. The mind cannot always choose circumstances. but it can choose reactions. And it is these reactions repeated over time that shape your character, your relationships, and ultimately your destiny. The Buddha taught that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies the power of freedom. Most people, however, never find that space. They react instantly, automatically, without awareness. Anger arises and they lash out. Fear arises and they shrink. Desire arises and they cling. These automatic reactions may feel natural, but they are simply habits. Habits that create cycles of suffering. Yet when you bring awareness into that space, you see that reaction is not destiny. You can pause, you can breathe, you can choose a different response. This choice, repeated again and again, is the foundation of liberation. Think of fire. If someone throws fuel on it, it blazes higher. If someone throws water, it calms. The situation is the same, an external spark, but the outcome depends on what is added. Your mind is the same. When insult or difficulty sparks anger, you can throw fuel by reacting with rage, or you can throw water by responding with patience. One choice creates more suffering, the other creates peace. The spark is inevitable. Your reaction decides the fire. Consider relationships. Imagine someone criticizes you. If you react instantly with defensiveness or aggression, the conflict escalates, the relationship weakens. But if you pause, breathe, and respond with calm curiosity, why do you feel that way? The conflict may dissolve. Trust may even deepen. The criticism did not decide the outcome. Your reaction did. In this way, every interaction is an opportunity to shape your relationships through awareness of reaction. Reactions also shape your inner world. When pain arises, if you react with resistance, "This should not happen, I cannot bear this," the suffering multiplies. But if you react with acceptance, "This is here, I will breathe through it," the suffering lessens. When failure arises, if you react with self-judgment, "I am worthless," you fall into despair. But if you react with compassion, "I tried, I will learn," you grow stronger. The event itself is the same. It is the reaction that decides whether the mind becomes a prison or a teacher. Why do reactions matter so much? Because they become habits, and habits become character. If you repeatedly react with anger, anger becomes your nature. If you repeatedly react with patience, patience becomes your nature. If you repeatedly react with fear, fear becomes your world. If you repeatedly react with courage, courage becomes your foundation. You are not simply the product of what happens to you. You are the product of how you repeatedly react to what happens. Buddhism illustrates this with the teaching of karma. Karma is not punishment or reward from outside. It is the natural result of actions and reactions. When you react with anger, you create the conditions for more anger in the future. When you react with compassion, you create the conditions for more compassion. The seeds you plant with each reaction grow into the world you live in. In this way, every moment of reaction is a moment of creation. So how can you begin to master reaction? The first step is awareness. Most people are not aware of their reactions until after they have acted. They shout in anger and only later feel regret. They sink into fear and only later realize the opportunity they missed. Awareness brings the reaction into consciousness. You begin to notice anger is arising, fear is arising, desire is arising. This noticing creates the space in which freedom lives. The second step is the pause. When you notice a reaction arising, pause before acting. Take a breath. Feel the body. Let the wave of emotion crest without carrying you away. This pause does not erase the emotion, but it weakens its grip. It gives you time to choose instead of being dragged by impulse. Even a single breath can transform the reaction. The third step is choice. In the pause, you ask, what response will create peace, not more suffering? What response aligns with wisdom, not illusion? Then you act. Sometimes the response is gentle silence. Sometimes it is firm words. Sometimes it is letting go. Sometimes it is compassionate action. The key is that it is chosen, not automatic. Over time, these steps become natural. The pause grows longer, the awareness sharper, the choice is wiser. Reactions that once enslaved you lose their power. Anger still arises, but you no longer lash out blindly. Fear still arises, but you no longer shrink. Desire still arises, but you no longer cling. You remain human, but you become free. Imagine someone insults you. In the past, you might have reacted instantly, arguing, defending, escalating the conflict. But now you pause. You notice the sting of anger, the tightening of the chest. You breathe. You see that the insult says more about their state of mind than about your worth. You choose silence, or a calm response, or perhaps even compassion. The insult loses its power. The chain of suffering is broken. This is mastery, not the absence of challenge, but the presence of wisdom in response. Science supports this as well. Studies show that emotional reactions are often automatic, rooted in the brain's survival systems. But mindfulness and meditation strengthen the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that governs awareness and choice. This means that with practice, you can literally rewire the brain to create space between stimulus and response. The Buddha's teaching that freedom lies in mastering reaction is now confirmed by neuroscience. Mastery of reaction is also the key to resilience. Life will never stop bringing difficulties. Pain, loss, and uncertainty are inevitable, but your reaction decides whether these difficulties break you or strengthen you. If you react with despair, you sink. If you react with patience and courage, you rise. This is why some people emerge from suffering with wisdom and compassion, while others remain bitter and broken. The difference lies not in what happened, but in how they reacted. Another gift of mastering reaction is freedom from being controlled by others. When people know they can trigger you with a word, a look, or an action, you are not free. You are their puppet. But when you control your reactions, no one controls you. They may speak harshly, but you remain calm. They may act unfairly, but you remain wise. They may reject you, but you remain whole. This is true strength, not the ability to control others, but the ability to control yourself. Of course, mastery does not mean perfection. There will be times when you react automatically, when anger or fear slips past awareness. But each mistake is an opportunity to learn. Instead of clinging to guilt, you reflect, what happened in my mind? How can I pause sooner next time? In this way, even mistakes become teachers, strengthening your practice. Over time, you will notice a profound shift. Life may still bring storms, but you no longer live as if you are drowning. You remain like a mountain. Winds blow, rains fall, yet you stand firm. You still feel, but you are not enslaved by feeling. You still respond, but your responses come from wisdom, not impulse. This is the freedom the Buddha spoke of, the freedom that comes not from controlling the world, but from mastering the mind's reactions to it. So remember this. The mind is the master of reaction, and reaction decides your destiny. Between stimulus and response lies the space of freedom. If you fill that space with awareness, pause, and choice, you transform your life. You may not control the storms of life, but you can control how you meet them. And when you meet them with wisdom, patience, and compassion, you discover a peace that no storm can take away. As we come to the end of this journey through the lessons of the mind, it becomes clear that everything, your peace, your suffering, your growth, your freedom, begins and ends with the mind. Life itself is neither cruel nor kind, neither easy nor impossible. It simply is. The seasons change, people come and go, fortunes rise and fall, health strengthens and fades. These are the natural movements of existence. But whether you live them as a prisoner or as a liberated being depends not on the events themselves, but on how your mind receives them. Throughout these chapters, we have returned again and again to this truth. You become what you think, because the mind creates the world you live in. If you fill your mind with fear, you live in a fearful world. If you fill it with compassion, you live in a compassionate world. The mind is a mirror, reflecting what you place before it. It is a seedbed, growing whatever thoughts you plant. It is a wheel, spinning wherever your habits direct it. It is a fire, blazing or calming depending on what fuel you add. It is a restless monkey, leaping without aim until it is trained in stillness. And above all, it is the master of your destiny, because every reaction, every habit, every story it tells becomes the shape of your life. The Buddha did not promise a life without pain. Pain is inevitable. Loss, disappointment, illness, and impermanence touch every life. What he promised was freedom from unnecessary suffering, the suffering created by illusions, by clinging, by uncontrolled reactions. He taught that when you see clearly, when you train the mind, you discover that peace is not something distant, waiting in the future, or hidden in possessions. Peace is here now in the way you meet each moment. Liberation is not escape from life. It is living fully awake within it. Let us pause and look back at the lessons we have explored. We began with the seed of thought, understanding that every thought is a seed planted in the soil of the mind, and the harvest is your reality. We learned that repetition shapes the mind, carving grooves that become habits, and that these habits, small and daily, determine the story of your life. We saw how desire creates chains, promising fulfillment while delivering restlessness, and how contentment breaks those chains by teaching the mind to rest in enoughness. We explored how the restless mind is never satisfied, always jumping, always searching until it learns stillness, and how in stillness, clarity, compassion, and freedom naturally arise. We discovered how illusions enslave the mind, illusions of permanence, of fixed identity, of salvation through possessions, and how truth liberates. We reflected on how reactions, more than circumstances, decide destiny. Between stimulus and response lies the space of freedom, and in that space, your life is shaped. We learned that the mind can be prison or key, mirror or cage, depending on how you train it. And at every step, the teaching was the same. You are not powerless. The mind can be trained. The chains can be broken. Peace can be found here, within you. What does this mean for your daily life? It means that every moment is a chance to practice. When anger arises, you can practice patience. When fear arises, you can practice courage. When desire arises, you can practice contentment. When pain arises, you can practice acceptance. Each practice is a step toward freedom, each step a carving of a new path in the mind. You do not need to wait for the perfect time, the perfect conditions, or the perfect self. The practice begins here, in this breath, in this moment. Many people imagine liberation as something distant, a mountaintop reached only after years of struggle. But liberation is not distant. It is available in every pause, in every breath, in every moment when you choose awareness over illusion. It is the smile that arises when you let go of clinging. It is the calm that remains when you refuse to fuel anger. It is the gratitude that blossoms when you see the blessings already here. These small moments are not insignificant. They are liberation in action, and over time they accumulate into a life of deep peace. The journey of the mind is not about perfection. The mind will always wander. Anger will still arise. Fear will still whisper. Desire will still tempt. The difference is that you are no longer their prisoner. You see them, you smile at them, and you let them pass. You no longer believe every thought, no longer obey every impulse. You rest in awareness, the sky that remains vast and clear no matter what clouds drift through it. In this awareness, you discover a freedom deeper than control, a freedom that no circumstance can take away. So what is the final message? It is this: guard your mind, train your mind, free your mind. Guard it because it is vulnerable to illusions, to negativity, to clinging. Train it because habits of awareness, compassion, and stillness can reshape it into a source of peace. Free it because once it sees truth, once it lets go of illusions, it discovers that it was never truly chained. The prison was an illusion, and the key was always in your hands. As you move forward, carry these lessons not as heavy burdens, but as gentle companions. Let them guide you in small ways each day. When you wake, begin with gratitude. When you walk, be mindful of each step. When you face difficulty, pause before reacting. When you feel desire, breathe into contentment. These are not grand acts. They are small choices, repeated until they become natural. And in these small choices, freedom is found. Imagine your mind as a garden. For years, weeds may have grown unchecked. Fear, anger, doubt. But beginning today, you can start planting new seeds. Peace, courage, compassion. At first, the weeds may still dominate. But with patience, with care, with daily tending, the flowers will grow. One day you will look at your mind and see not a tangled wilderness, but a radiant garden, filled with clarity and calm. This is not fantasy. It is the natural result of consistent practice. So remember this, your mind is not your enemy. It is your greatest tool, your greatest teacher, your greatest path. Yes, it can create suffering, but it can also create freedom. Yes, it can enslave, but it can also liberate. The mind is both the challenge and the solution, both the path and the destination. When you train it, when you care for it, when you live with awareness, you discover that peace was never outside you. It was always here, waiting within. This is the conclusion, but not the end. For the journey of the mind is ongoing, unfolding in each breath, each step, each choice. Carry these teachings into your life, not as abstract ideas, but as living practices. And as you practice, you will see, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. With your thoughts, you create your world.